Okay, good morning. Okay, good morning. Welcome to the first meeting of the Joint Revenue Committee here in Casper, and as our interim work that we've been assigned by Management Council. And first order of business is roll call. So can we please call the roll?
Senator French. Senator Ide.
Here.
Senator McCowan.
Excused. I think he's on his way en route.
Senator Pappas. Representative Baer.
Here.
Representative Byron.
Here.
Representative Locke.
Present.
Representative Northrup.
Here.
Representative Oakley.
Here.
Representative Storer. Here. Representative Strock. Here. Representative Zwanitzer.
Here.
Co-Chairman Beitman.
Here.
Chairman Harshman.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Just as we get started here, just really appreciate all the work that's gone into this packet of information. Folks who are watching online can access that through our legislative website. Just appreciate the work by our LSO staff and the Department of Revenue, all the work that you've put into that. And really the focus of these next couple of days is, and that's a big part of this committee, and is to continue learning and getting this information out so we can make better policies we learn. And so really, we're not going to really vote on any bills the next couple of days. We're going to continue to learn more about property tax and personal property tax, and also as far as sales tax. So again, appreciate folks being here. We'll have opportunity for public comment after each topic. And again, I think if there's, we welcome all that. And if there's any, the decorum piece, always address the chairman. If you have conversations between yourselves, just take them outside the room so we don't interrupt. And just the basic standard decorum of the legislature in these meetings. Okay, so with that, any opening remarks, Mr. Co-Chair, do you have anything?
Ready to go.
Okay, members, I think we're ready to go. So our first, this morning, we're going to really work and learn a little more about property tax. And our first item on the agenda is a review of the 2024 property tax bills. Our Legislative Service Office staff, Mr. Anderson, and we'll just review that. So floor is yours, Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
Could we put it out there what the
Senator
Wi-Fi password is?
Yeah, actually, I told the crowd it's 17 Belle Fourche, and that's capital B and a capital F, Belle Fourche.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and I think Director Henson might join me, and she can chime in on some of these bills and kind of where they've gone since they've been adopted by the committee. So just wanted to start this off with a brief summary of the recent efforts of the Revenue Committee, just so everyone can kind of remember where we are, and as we've had property tax as a interim topic for this committee, really going back to 2021, where it kind of started primarily as a discussion of the appeal process with all the appeals that were coming out of this county that we're in right now. And then that kind of shifted to a more general discussion of property tax relief in 2023. So just wanted to kind of actually set on the agenda 2024, but I'll give a brief talk of some of the 2023 bills where we really started the committee. In 2023, we did House Bill 98, which was a homeowner's tax exemption. That was sponsored by the committee. It would have been a $50,000 exemption, not to exceed 25% of the value of the property. That was, as I said, sponsored by the committee, but did not pass the legislature. One bill that did pass out of this committee, both the committee and the legislature, was House Bill 99, which was the property tax refund program. So before that bill, that to qualify for the program, you had a maximum income of 3/4 of the gross median household income. That was increased to 125% of the gross median income. That bill also increased the maximum number of assets that you can have to qualify for the program from 100,000 to 150,000, and also increased the maximum amount of the refund from 50% of your prior year tax bill to 75%, with subject to a cap of the median, half of the median property tax bill in the county. Then that can also be 100% if you have a county optional program in place, and that was added by a 2022 revenue bill that added that county optional program. And then finally, in 2023, the committee also passed or sponsored a bill to do a constitutional amendment to make residential property a separate class. That bill did not pass the legislature, but a different resolution was amended to be very similar to that bill, which was Senate Joint Resolution 3, which will go out to the voters as the ability to add a residential property as a separate class of property. So then getting into the most recent session, 2024 session, first we had out of this committee House Bill 3. That was a property tax exemption for long-term homeowners. It provides an exemption of 50% of the assessed value of the property for residents who are 65 years of age or older and who paid property taxes in Wyoming for at least 25 years. And I think Brenda can give a little update on that.
Director, good morning.
Good morning. Brenda Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue. If I may quickly go back to 2023 and talk about Senate Joint Resolution 3 and the ballot initiative. I think it's important for the legislature to recognize that, should that pass, as Josh indicated, it would create a residential class. But what that does is provide this body with numerous questions that need to be answered. First and foremost, if it passes and creates this new class for residential real property, then the all other property category will include residential personal property, which includes titled mobile homes. It will include, of course, commercial outbuildings, agricultural land. It's going to include all of those things. And so we can administer that, creating another tier of residential and then the all other, and allowing for the CAMA system, computer system, mass appraisal system, to apply a different level of assessment. That's fairly easy, but it becomes very important that the legislature define what is residential property. So for example, does that mean we're going to include only single-family residential property? Are we going to include multifamily residential property? Is it any structure where it's intended and built for human habitation? Or are we considering an income-producing property? Do we then say that residential is only an owner-occupied structure? And does a residential structure used for income purposes become a commercial structure with a different level of assessment? So all of those items, plus we already know, as I stated, it says residential real property would be that new class. So mobile homes are not included in that new class because that's personal property. And that's a big distinction. When we get into some of the other legislation was passed in 2024, we'll see a little bit of confusion on one of the tax relief programs. But what are we going to do with those rental residences, apartments, short stay rentals, those types of things? And in addition, there's the ability to create a subclass for that owner-occupied piece in the residential. And I think that the legislature is going to need to clarify, what that means. We also know that there can be exemptions that are the legislation, and we're going to talk about the rest of these, and I'll get into the long-term homeowners. But how do all those things meld? And so as we're talking, as Josh and I are going over these bills that passed in 2024, I need everyone to recognize there are no provisions within any of those exemptions that restrict a property owner from claiming multiple. So you can claim the, well, you don't have to apply, but we can have that 4% exemption on a property. We can have them claim a veteran's exemption on top of that. We can have them claim the long-term homeowners exemption on top of that. And then we can also have them apply for a refund of up to 50% of what they, 75%. So all of those, right now, we have nothing in statute that prohibits using them all if they qualify. So just keeping that in mind. So now turning, unless there are any questions on that creation of a new residential class.
Representative Bear has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Director Henson. I don't know, I know you've been with the division for a very long time, and I think you were around, or at least could remember, the discussions that took place in the 80s when the division into 3 groups took place. Could you just share with us what the thinking was, if there was anything that you can recall, about why they conglomerated residential in with commercial and ag and all the others in that category, please?
Director, and what was your job back in the 80s?
Mr. Chairman, I wasn't around for the actual testimony. I didn't start until 88, which we had already, those decisions had already been made, but
And when you say start, where'd you start?
I started in the county assessor's office
Yeah.
in 88.
Yeah.
So Representative Bear, the majority of the discussion that was in the press was the minerals at 100% because it's assessed once, the industrial at 11.5%. Wasn't a lot of discussion. And then, of course, the 9.5 for all other. Most of what I recall is just the discussion saying that commercial did not want to be in a separate class from residential, and agriculture didn't want to be in a separate class. In other states, you do see this ability to create multiple classes of property. But every time you do that, it shifts the tax burden. And so that was the discussion at that time, that keeping them all in one, and the Constitution specifically states you cannot create a subclass of those 3 classes. And so without getting into further detail, that was the main gist of it. So with that, the long-term homeowners, quite honestly, I believe that that piece of legislation has received more questions. County assessors will testify that they're fielding a lot of questions on the long-term homeowners. So we needed to get started rather rapidly. So we have a chapter, Department of Revenue, Chapter 14. The entire chapter is devoted to exemptions for property taxation. So we had to do emergency rules for Chapter 14 to implement the 4% exemption for 2024. So those are already out there. You can find them on our website, but we limited the changes just to that. And we'll talk about that bill here in a moment. But then now we need to promulgate rules for 2025 that will include expanding the 4% cap to the associated residential land and the long-term homeowners exemption to include an application. And so if I may, we have already began working with the county assessors across the state and getting their input, but putting together some sort of an application process for the long-term homeowners exemption. there, specific criteria, that being, that they are 65 years of age, or they received the exemption by a previously qualifying individual. That probably has received more discussion. We know that right now, the long-term homeowners exemption is only a 2-year bill as it sits, 2025 and 2026. I believe that this committee and the legislature will be spending a great deal of time trying to figure out what do we do after that. But because of the provision that says that if someone qualified for the exemption and then they pass away and the surviving spouse still owns the property, but they're not 65 years of age yet, but what how the statute reads is, as long as someone qualified for it, your spouse qualified for it before before they pass, you can continue to get that exemption. Right now, granted, it's only the 2 years, but should it be expanded in the future, I think that that's something that the legislature will want to address, because you could have a situation where someone that's 65 years of age marries someone that's 40 years of age and has only lived in the state 2 years, and they could continue to receive that long-term homeowners exemption indefinitely the way the language is in the bill right now. So you'll see at the bottom of this application draft, and like I said, we are still working on this, but age requirement, or I'm a surviving spouse of a person who qualified in a prior year. It's not going to be applicable for 2025 because that's going to be the first year it's available, but in 2026, we may have some of those situations where they wouldn't qualify on their own. On the back side of the page, you'll see where we're asking the property owner to provide us just with the years and the location of those prior residential. If, let's say they've lived in Fremont County for 3 years and then they moved to Laramie County and now they reside in Sublette County. All we need from that applicant is to let us know which tax years they paid at those locations. We have the ability within the county treasurer's office to verify if that is true or not, but you'll also see historical ownership, because we know that, many of you know that I used to be Brenda Arnold. I paid property tax under Brenda Arnold for numerous years, but now I'm Brenda Henson. But you're not going to find my residential property taxes that I paid under Brenda Henson. So we needed to know, what other names did you hold that property in other counties? So we just ask them for that information and then basically have them sign a certification statement that is under penalty of false swearing. But this is it. It's a 2-page application process. And if you qualify, you get up to 50% of your property taxes. And the key to this piece of legislation is you never pay those. That exemption is applied before the assessment ever goes to the tax roll, so you never get billed for those. So with that, make sure I haven't.
Director, I just want to, Senator Pappas has a question
Okay.
right here.
Right here. I just had a question on that, on the back page where you'd mentioned about the tax years paid and where. Obviously, you have to pay for at least 25 years. There's 8 lines on here. So is it your intent that they only give 8 years? Or it seems a little unclear to me how I should fill this out.
Director.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, we will have an instruction page along with this, but the intent is tax year or years paid. So if I paid 1990 to 1998 at a residence and a county, that would be 1 line.
So that if you, like for me, I've been there forever, so I just have 1 line the last 25 years. I see, I understand. Okay, thank you.
That's correct,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, continue. How many, when we ran this bill, I seem to remember basically about half the states have some kind of provision like this for folks who've been here a long time, really paid into their local governments for a long time. So, They probably do it in similar ways, I guess, through an application. Any thoughts on that, or?
Mr. Chairman, the application process, we believe, is manageable for this particular exemption. We estimated approximately 6,500 applications statewide. For the larger counties, that equates to about 1,000 applications. I know that many of the county assessors this year, as taxpayers inquired about this, they're kept a list. They've got a list, and they anticipate sending out the applications in that fall time period when they're available. So I think it's something that is manageable on this level, because they really are. County assessors are going to have to look at each one of these applications and verify that they qualify. And if it were all owner occupied, that's when I think we really need to re-examine the application process and possibly have another way statewide to administer an exemption that may be in place, or if we create a subclass based on the Constitution changing, then I think we're really going to have to start looking at that differently. But for this program, right now, only 2 years, we don't feel that it's appropriate to spend taxpayer dollars to create an application process and system for a program that's only going to be on the books for 2 years at this point. The other piece is just a reminder that the long-term homeowners exemption is not backfilled currently by the state. And so every entity will see a reduced assessed value for budget purposes for 2025 tax year, which would be fiscal year 2026, and then, of course, the following year. But we will be able to run reports out of the CAMA system. We'll be able to tell the legislature exactly how much assessed value was exempted. The same thing holds true for the other exemptions that we'll talk about that don't have a backfill. This is going to be important for every taxing authority. The fire districts are going to want to know how much was exempted. I can only levy up to a maximum of 3 mills. How much was exempted? How much revenue did we lose? And if they're an entity that never went to their max, and now maybe they're going to have to go to their max because of the exemptions, I think those are going to be important pieces for all of the taxing entities.
Just
but
to
we can run
refresh
that.
our memory, I think the fiscal note, the estimate was about 8 or 9 million statewide per year.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. And as we go through the presentation this afternoon on the demographics of Wyoming, I think a lot of that information will be applicable and bring up some questions. So with that, unless there are other questions on the long-term homeowners.
Senator Ide has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you see, or can you tell yet whether tax revenues are down with that 4% cap? I heard in Natrona County that our collections were actually up even with that 4% cap. I haven't verified that. I heard it through the grapevine. Can you give a comment? Are you seeing any numbers come in? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, county assessors across the state are required to submit their abstract no later than June 1st. So we don't have that information as of yet. Once those abstracts are submitted to the state board, we will be running all of those queries to determine, how much as far as exemption and what the taxable value is. Keeping in mind, minerals, depending on which county, which taxing authority you're talking about, if minerals are up, then their values may still be up. It just depends. And again, on that demographic sheet that we're going to talk about this afternoon, some taxing authorities are very dependent on residential property values. Other taxing authorities, like Converse County, 3% of their assessed value is residential. So to make a general statement wouldn't really be appropriate.
Okay, continue.
So next up, Mr. Chairman, we had 2024 House Bill 4. This was the property tax refund program. As I noted, in 2023, this committee had expanded that up to 125% of the gross median income, so more people would qualify. The bill from this year was a continued expansion of that program. So now, if income is more than 125% and up to 145% of the median household income, they would get 65% of the refund that they otherwise would get under the program. As the bill passed the legislature, there was an additional category of if you had over 145 and up to 165%, you would get 25% of that refund amount. That portion was vetoed by the governor. I would note that there is still one reference to that 165% number in statute that wasn't stricken in the veto, so it might be beneficial to go back and clean that up, Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Chairman, as everyone knows, we're taking applications for the 2023 tax year refunds as we speak. As of yesterday, we had just crested over about 8,300 applications that have been received. The deadline for the application is Monday, June 3rd. As long as the applicant has submitted that either to the Department of Revenue or to your local county treasurer, no later than 5 o'clock on Monday the 3rd, we will process those applications. One thing about this legislation that passed, we anticipated that we would have about 12,000 applications is what we believe. We knew that the refunds themselves were going to be significantly higher because of the median residential property tax bill in 2023 in most counties had a significant increase. But the other part of that is the household income numbers. Even if House Bill 4 had not passed, the household income numbers were significantly higher in 2023. So it really opened the door, not only at the 125%, but at 145%. It really has brought more people into qualifying for that. Couple of things just to point out, though. I believe that the question of assets other than the house that you're getting the property tax relief and the one vehicle per adult in the household, and of course your retirement counts are not included, but that $156,900 is the number this year per adult member of the household. But as we get into these higher income numbers, it's a little bit easier to imagine that if I'm making $110,000 a year, that I've bought things, that I own other assets, that I may have that RV, or I may have that boat, or I may have that. So I can tell you that we're having a lot more people asking us, how are you verifying that person? We're having county treasurers say, they have more on the ground knowledge of their residents, and they're telling us, how are we going to check those assets? Now, part of that bill that you passed did include a provision that the Department of Audit will conduct audits upon request of the county treasurer or upon request of the Department of Revenue. I do anticipate we'll have a few of those this year. I don't anticipate they will be significant, but I think it's that asset test that's going to be the biggest question there. The other thing I wanted to remind everyone, again, we had to do emergency rules based on the change this year, so those emergency rules are out there. We're just referencing the statute. As Josh indicated, there's still that reference of 165% because the governor couldn't strike that because he couldn't write in the 145%, but he did strike any refund provision. So basically, the law says you can get a refund and qualify, you can qualify up to 165%, but there's no refund provision in the law for anything above the 145%. The other piece, because we are starting a new biennium, so there's $20 million appropriated for this program for the biennium. That was the original $20 million. There was an additional appropriation with House Bill 4 to take into account the 125 to 145, but that did not get included with this legislation. So I anticipate that $10 million is probably not going to cover the exemptions for 2023's refunds. And I would envision that if we are going to fully fund this for 2024 refunds, we'll need to submit a supplemental budget request.
Question. Sure. Go ahead, Representative
Thank you,
Swamitzer.
Mr. Chairman. So by our next meeting, would you have those numbers of, if all applications are due here in a week and a half, you can process and you can roughly tell us what that supplemental budget number would need to be? And so I'm going to ask multiple questions here. Would you anticipate putting it in your agency's supplemental budget request? Would you like us to bring a bill or do both? And I guess my other one question while I have the mic. So after June, whatever it was, 6,
June 3rd.
June 3rd, that is the entire tax year for '24, early start of '25. And no one can get no one can apply for that property tax relief
23.
for the entire rest of that tax year that is commencing on July 1st, or that's for last year's, and it's a rebate, if that makes sense.
Exactly, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Zwanitzer, correct. We are processing refunds for the 2023 tax year now. The appropriation will receive that money in our budget, the $20 million on July 1st. So that's why none of the applicants have received a refund check. On the second year of a program, we've already got the money. And so we typically are going ahead and sending out the refund checks as we work them. We've had to hold all of the refund checks. And of that 8,300, we've actually processed about 3,500 of those. We won't be completely done until the end of September. So we may not have the numbers for the next meeting, but we'll definitely have them before the November meeting. We'll know exactly what those numbers are. And as far as a preference, this committee, the legislature will have some options. There's nothing in statute that talks about prorating, but it has been done in the past. So for example, on the second year of a biennium, if we only had $5 million left and we had applications that would have required $6 million for the full refund, we prorated and gave everyone the $5 million we had left, but they didn't get the full refund. So the committee could have us do that. The legislature could have us do that, or they could appropriate additional funds to complete that. But there's a lot of moving parts as we continue to go through these other bills that have gone into effect. It's, do you want to continue to do the refund, or do you want to focus on property tax relief that's at the front end? For example, if you're going to reduce the level of assessment on the front end, maybe the refund program doesn't need to be as broad as it is today. If everyone's getting a cap on 4% of their residential properties from the prior year, maybe the refund program doesn't need to be as broad. Those are all things that you, as a body, will need to consider when we get all of these things. If I'm receiving a senior citizen's property tax exemption of 50% of my property tax, maybe that particular, it's so significant, maybe they shouldn't qualify for other tax relief. The more relief we give on the front end, keep in mind as well, those refund dollars may be less. So when they're requesting a refund of their 2024 property taxes that were already capped at 4%, we may not see that one grow as much because you've capped the amount of that bill on the front end. Lots of moving parts here, and I apologize if I'm a little confused on how I portray it to the committee, but these are all things that the county assessors, county treasurers, Department of Revenue, we're all trying to balance all of those approaches.
Follow-up.
Thanks, one more quickly, and it's probably more of a question for the counties. But when people applied for the refund, do they know the exact amount they're getting back then in July, or do we tell them to wait to make sure we have enough money in the pot and it'll be calculated? Or do they come in and applied last month? They say just wait till July 1st and you'll get a check for $600.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Swanitzer, I would doubt if they know exactly. The only ones that will know exactly are those that their median residential property tax bill was less than the median for their county, because then they know they can get 75% of their residential property tax bill. But then when we get into the 125 to 145, where we got to subtract off 35%, so I don't anticipate that the taxpayer, when they apply, knows exactly what their refund is going to be. But the first year, we typically process everything as a full refund. So for 2023, which the first year of that funding we'll receive on July 1 of 2024, we'll fund that one at 100%. It's just that second year of the biennium that we may need to either hold those refunds until we get everything and then send all the checks out at one time, maybe at a reduced amount. But if we get funding that's sufficient, we may be fine to go ahead and send out checks immediately following processing of application. So we need to communicate with this body.
We have another question, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, just for clarification, it's my understanding people can apply for the refund program both through your office online or at the county. Is that at the county clerk's office or the county assessor's office?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Barrett's County Treasurer's Office.
Treasurer's office.
So they can apply online at the Department of Revenue. They can bring in their application or mail in their application. You may recall, we sent out applications and packets to everyone that applied for 2022 refunds. We sent those out the end of April. So they already had those, so with a self-addressed stamp, we didn't stamp it, self-addressed envelope, that they could send that back in. But if they need help filling those out, or they don't have an application and they want a manual application, we send out packets to every county treasurer across the state, so they have those available in their office. And they can just leave them there, and then the county treasurer will mail it in for that applicant to our office. The key is that it has to be date stamped, that it was received by either the county treasurer or our office no later than June 3rd.
Follow-up? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, and what exact paperwork would they need to bring to the treasurer's office or have available online to submit to your office?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Bear, we need a copy of their 2023 property tax bill, a copy of the receipt showing that their 2023 property taxes were paid in full, and we need proof of all income. And just so this committee understands, that if we receive an application and we're missing some of that documentation, we send a follow-up letter to that applicant, explain what we're missing, and give them 14 days to provide that information. So even though the June 3rd date has come and gone, if we're just getting the supplemental documentation and we receive that after June 3rd, we go ahead and accept it. We just need the application no later than June 3rd.
Please continue.
All right, so next up, Mr. Chairman, so there was two bills, or there actually were multiple bills related to property tax inflation cap. So the committee sponsored 2024 House Bill 18, which was a tax cap of 5%. That bill did not pass the legislature, but what did was an alternative one, 2024 House Bill 45, which was structured as a property tax exemption in two parts. First was an exemption on a single-family residential structure of any amount of increase in value that was more than 4% over the prior year. That went into effect immediately, and then there was a second exemption on the associated improved land of the residential structure, and that would go into effect in 2025.
Mr.
Folks
Chairman?
have already seen that on their tax bill. I mean,
Yes.
It's printed on there as an exemption. I saw it on mine. And next year again will be the land included with that.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. And I do want to extend huge appreciation to the county assessors across the state and to Ken Gill, the administrator of the Property Tax Division, because they took the time. I mean, you may recall, yes, it's an exemption of 4%, an exemption of any value that exceeds 4% of the prior year's value on that residential structure, but it had two other qualifiers. That property owner could not have acquired it during the prior calendar year. And if they made changes in the footprint, meaning in addition, or if it was new construction, they didn't qualify for and county assessors had to find those properties, remove those exemptions. They loaded them in mass, but they had to remove it when it wasn't applicable, and then make sure that that was all done before they sent out their assessment schedules the end of April. Some property owners didn't see anything on the bottom of their assessment schedule, meaning their residential property didn't go up over 4% in that from one year to the next. But those that did, it actually gave the amount of the value that was exempted and then an estimated tax savings on the assessment schedule. So, just a really a big effort to get that done. And quite honestly, we did not get a lot of phone calls at the Department of Revenue. It seemed to be a very transparent process. But to your point, Chairman Harshman, next year, in 2025, when the exemption, and it's a separate exemption where we add the land in on this 4% cap. So we anticipate that that is going to impact more property owners than the exemption on the residential structure. I'll give you an example. Let's say in 2024, the fair market value of a lot was $60,000. That's $5,700 in assessed value in 2024. Let's say it went from $60,000 to $65,000 for the next year. That's pretty reasonable that we see increases in value. But $65,000, if we put 104% on the 5,700 from 2024, that maximum assessed value is 5,928. So we're going to see an exemption, even if that residential land only went from 60 to 65, 4% on those lower numbers kicks in an exemption fairly quickly. That would be $247 in an exemption. And keeping in mind, this exemption is not backfilled either. And so again, we will have reports in every county and for every taxing authority that explains how much this exemption reduced their assessed value. For counties, it's important for many of them, but these exemptions that are not backfilled are significantly important for cities and towns. And we'll talk about that a little bit more this afternoon. But yes, we believe that when we incorporate the land on that cap, more people will receive relief.
All right, so next up, Mr. Chairman, just a couple of additional bills that the committee sponsored, but that did not go into effect. So 2024 House Joint Resolution 1, this was related to the property tax classes. It would have replaced 2023 House Joint Resolution 3, and it just would have created separate classes for all of the classes of all other properties. So residential, commercial, ag, and personal. And again, that one didn't pass. And then we had, of course, 2024 Senate File 54, which was the homeowner tax exemption, sponsored by the committee, passed by the legislature, but vetoed by the governor. Would have given a 25% exemption on the first 2 million of fair market value with a sunset date, and then appropriated 125 million to reimburse local governments, and then authorized a transfer out of LISRA for another 100 million.
Anything else? Okay, appreciate it. Any questions before we turn you loose? Representative Zwanitzer.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. It's more of a comment, and I guess it'll be a question. So the biggest concerns I heard from my district and from 4 individuals specifically were that they bought their property in 2023, and that all of their neighbor, everybody in their division's taxes went up, probably because they bought property there and bought an expensive house, right? But they did not get that 4% cap. And I knew moving in the future, there's expectation that everybody was kind of treated equally at ground level, and then as soon as you sold your house. But I think it was a surprise to me and perhaps several of my constituents that if they had bought the property in 2023, they got the full tax increase. I don't know if the department heard that many complaints, or they're just, that my part of town is going up expensive quickly. But was that your understanding, I guess, from the beginning, all these conversations were that if you'd bought a house in 2023, you weren't going to be eligible for the same kind of relief that everybody else got starting in 2024?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Zwanitzer, we did not receive feedback from property owners at the Department of Revenue, but your local county assessors may have other comments related to that. It was a concept, those two concepts about, it originally started out with a conversation of if you just purchased your property, you wouldn't get the exemption. Initially, the conversation was you needed to own your property multiple years before you would qualify for that exemption. There were comments about it needed to be owner occupied. Honestly, there were some, not really concessions, but just working together to figure out how can we roll something out in 2024 that doesn't require an application process, that can be administered. And we knew county assessors knew if the property had transferred hands so that they could administer that. We knew county assessors knew if it was new construction or if it had an addition. Language that we had proposed initially was, substantial improvements. Well, how do you define that? And, do we litigate that? I don't think we've got anybody that has an appeal on the implementation of this exemption, to my knowledge. So I think for the short amount of time and the compromises that were made, I think it worked for that first year. Are there other things that could be considered in the future? Definitely. I think that is key. But with that, many times when a property owner purchases a property, and this is just from my own experience, either the seller has done some remodeling, updating, some investment to that property before they put it on the market to make it marketable, or that new buyer comes in and does a lot of changes. So that first year when a property changes hand, very typically, it doesn't exist truly in the same manner this year that it did last year. Maybe it wasn't an addition and it wasn't new construction, but it's new carpet, new paint, those, new countertops, those types of things. And I think that was part of that discussion for the first year. Did that answer your question?
Mr. Chairman, and it was just, I think, a surprise to several of the homeowners who have, they're all the same 38 to 40 acre parcels, and they all went up the same value on the land, and one or two of them, right, because they'd bought in 2023, and I don't know if they made an official complaint and an appeal, but it wouldn't be really appealable, I think is what they were told, that this is a law. And so I guess my other question, is there any way to fix that? My ultimate concern is it fair, equitable, and equal among all taxpayers to say everybody else got this? Because nobody should have expected it in 2023, I guess is my point. And if nobody was expecting it, everybody else got the benefit. The people who bought their property in 2023 just missed out. Is there a way to rectify that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that is a policy decision that this body could definitely go back. You could eliminate that requirement. Mr. Chairman, I did want to mention the veterans exemption that was expanded. That's another bill that is expanded for 2025 taxes. That went for, it changed that exemption amount from $3,000 assessed dollars to $6,000 assessed dollars. Average mill levies, you're looking $220 a year on property. It's because it's $3,000 times the mill levy. That's what your tax savings is. And now it's going to be $6,000 times the mill levy, and that's our tax savings. So it'd be about $440, give or take. But it's important to note that our veterans exemption runs on a tax year basis, and you have to qualify for the veterans exemption no later than the fourth Monday in May of 2024 to get it on your 2024 property taxes. But you can also use your veterans exemption on motor vehicle plates. If you don't own residential property, you can use it on motor vehicle. So on that day after the fourth Monday in May, for motor vehicle, the next year's exemptions start then. And so I just wanted this committee to recognize that. So for those veterans that are getting plates in June of 2024, they'll begin to see that $6,000 exemption then when they renew their plates. Our veterans exemption system, we have a system that all 23 county assessors use. It tracks all of the veterans exemptions and where it's used, because you can't use a veterans exemption in the two separate counties. But so on their motor vehicles, they'll see that increased starting up next month. However, it's just on the motor vehicles, and on motor vehicles, the amount of that exemption is significantly lower, right? And because 6,000 assessed dollars on 30 mills is significantly less money than 6,000 assessed dollars times your mill levy on your home. So just wanted to make that, and of course, that exemption is backfilled as well. Basically, the county treasurer does not collect that money, but they submit a report to the Department of Revenue no later than September 1st. We notify the state treasurer's office, and they cut checks to the county treasurers in each of the counties to backfill the entire amount of the veterans exemption.
Okay, Representative Bear has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, did I hear you correctly that it's an either or, either the vehicle, you get the exemption towards your vehicle licenses, or you get it for your residence?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Bear, so you're entitled to, once you qualify for the exemption, it would be 6,000 assessed dollars. Now, we do have those individuals that use part of it on a mobile home. Part of, if they own the land that the mobile home's sitting on, they could use it on that. If they still had some of that assessed dollars left after that, they could use it on a motor vehicle. Typically, that's not the case. Typically, if you've got a residential property, you're using that 6,000 assessed dollars all, but the exemption itself really wanted to have a provision for those that don't own their primary residence, and that's why the motor vehicle piece is out there. And county assessors do an excellent job educating veterans to let them know, if you own a property, you're much better off using this 6,000 assessed dollars on your real property as opposed to using it on your vehicle. It's worth more money in your pocket.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Henson, for being here and all the great information. I wanted to go back to the refund program and ask you to perhaps summarize some of the conversations we had at the end of the session about the number of households you estimated actually would likely qualify based on income for that program, what that number is based on where the bill ended up after the governor's partial veto, and what the number of people who are actually applying for the program represents as a percentage of that total, just estimated, generally speaking.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Storer, I haven't done a lot of the analysis yet just because we haven't got, I anticipate it's going to be a very busy week at the Department of Revenue with applications coming in. When we were estimating originally during the interim for this committee and looking at that 125%, what was interesting about that is we had no idea how much that median residential income was going to increase, nor did we know how much the median residential tax bills had increased from the prior year. So we estimated $10 million a cost for the program under that, just simply using last year's applicants and then using the percent of increase from residential, median residential property tax bill from 2022 to 2023 and making those adjustments per county. And that's how we came up with that $10 million. We will have better numbers in July. They won't be complete because we won't have them all. But I'll be surprised if we exceed the 12,000 applicants that we estimated during the legislative session. But I think the reasoning for that is we have property owners that have invested in real estate, and that seems to be the biggest. If they own their home, they also own other real estate in other states, other counties. And I think that we do not, typically if the property owner doesn't qualify, they just don't apply. So our numbers regarding who did not qualify, I don't think are good numbers for us to rely on because they're just not applying. And I really don't have any more details. I know your questions, I understand, and we definitely will have more detailed information in the fall. I will be able to, as soon as we get more of these applications keyed in. Again, thank you for the $60,000 for the temp staff. That has been huge. I've got 2 employees that we've got doing nothing but keying in property tax refund applications Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. So thank you very much for that. But I think it's going to be interesting to see the numbers and where the counties are for this year, 2023, because we did see such big increases in property tax bills from 22 to 23, and see where those pan out. Sorry. I think that's it. I think that's it.
Thank you. We're going to, any public comment on any of those previous tax bills? Any thoughts? Anybody here? Any public comment? Anybody online? I didn't see anybody sign up for this issue. Yeah, if you want to come on up, just introduce yourself and who you represent and your comments on any of these bills in past sessions. Good morning. Good morning. I'd have to snap a knuckle to get that thing to turn on. There you go.
Got her. Pat Meyer, Park County Assessor. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Revenue Committee. I'm not here, I do not represent the Assessors Associations on this particular subject. I'm doing this as the Park County Assessor, just so you know. They could be, they might agree, they might not. But anyways, I did email you guys some stuff out and gave you some copies of it. I just want to go over a little bit of what's happening in Park County. First of all, and congratulations on House Bill 45. We can call that an exemption as much as you want, but really, we limited the increases. And when you limit the increases, that's what the presentation you heard from me, that's what other states, that's what it was all about. But House Bill 45 was a great compromise for me, especially when you're going to put the land in it too now. So it basically does the same thing. And it's all based on, it's not how much money you're going to lose, it was how much money did you need in the first place. So, as you can see from the first page on there, I've got the medium household incomes and the medium tax bill. You can see Park is the #1 tax bill. I consider Teton County, no offense, they're their own state. they're so far different than the rest of us. I don't really speak to that issue, but you can see they have the same problem, only 20 times more than the rest of us. But they also make the money too. You can see Park County, we are at 26.4. That's $1,000 higher than 15 of the counties on this page. So we're in trouble. Sheridan County, you're right next to us. So we have a little different situation than the other counties do. If you go to the next page, and our household income is not that great. We're at 71,000 for two people. And I might say our average house now is 479,000 to buy an average house. And that's countywide. If we were just concentrating on the Cody area, I'm sure you'll see that is more into the 500,000 and so forth. Very hard on our wages to buy a new house. And this does not fix the affordable housing issue, which we'll go into next. Now, we did some rollbacks on the next page from 2020. What you'll see on the right is where we were on these years, and we started at 2020, didn't change. We put 4% on all residential structures except for new construction. We took that out because they didn't get it that year, according to the rules, the statute we have now. And then we added them back in after we put the 4% on them, okay? To come up with the, so you'll see in 2021, the value it was, we were still right there, okay? In 2022, yeah, we're lower than the 10 million. We're at 9 million, putting the cap on because we did another 4% and we took care of construction the same way, brought it back in. And then 2023, when we really went up, we'd be at 11 million. And 2024, we'd be at 10 million. We did the same thing on 21. If we were to start at 21, we would leave that the same and just do 22, 23, and 24. But if you go to the next page, it'll show you the next 10 years. So that 10 million we'd be at, even though we could have been at 12 million, was still higher than every year and just as much as 2014 and 2015. Again, so the question, again, it's not how much we lose, it's how much we really needed. So you can't say we were living off this stuff before, and there is inflation, but still 10 million, Park County rarely has 10 million. We had it in a few years, and we would have had that there, and it'll be, even with the 4% increase, we'd be all right. Now, I just gave you some examples of how much these increases have been killing us. If you go to former Representative Dave Bonner's house, you'll see with the no rollback, his tax bill is $4,780. If we rolled back to 2020, you'll see his tax bill would now be, would have been for 2024 at $3,273. And if we rolled back to 2021, it would have been $3,449. Now this year, he barely went up to 4%. So he didn't show any big refund of $16, that wasn't much. Because Park County on average just went up 5% this year. The Craig report was actually right this year. They predicted 5%, and that's what we went up on average, but we also had neighborhoods that went up 14%. So it wasn't always, that was an average, and there's always neighborhoods that are more, they like the location more. I also did Representative Northrup's house for an example.
Mr. Chairman,
Question,
I just want to make sure the good assessor checked with both people before he wanted to release. I know it's all public information,
Yeah,
but
it's all public information, and no, I didn't check with them. I thought they'd
hey,
be.
let's, hold on, stop.
Yeah.
Let's always work through the chairman. We're not going to have this back and forth.
Yeah.
Everybody.
My apologies.
Okay, so let's back up. The question is, did you ask the chairman?
Did you ask a former and a current legislator before releasing your
And-
tax information publicly on a microphone in a publicly recorded meeting for all time?
Okay, Assessor, go ahead.
No, I believed it was public information, and I've talked with our former Representative Bonner extensively over this situation, and I'm sure he has no problem. I did not contact my senator and representative. I thought if I used their bill, they would have a better understanding of what I was talking about.
Okay, very good. And just so everybody knows, this is public information. You can go to any county assessor or treasurer's office to look at the bills of anybody in any county in Wyoming.
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll
Go ahead,
continue
Assessor.
with Representative Northrup's bill. As you see, with no rollback, his bill is $3,869. If we rolled back to 2020, his tax bill is $3,000. If we rolled back to 2021, it was $3,107. Now, Representative Northrup his place did go up more than 4% this year. So he saved himself $235. His tax bill would have been, I was looking at French, never mind. Senator French. His tax bill would have been the $3,869. Instead, his tax bill would have been, it was $3,666. So with the 4%, he did save some money this year. But as you can see with the rollback, right, yeah. So Senator French's bill would have been, with no rollback, would have been $6,777. With the rollback to 2020, it had been $5,879, and he didn't go up in 2021, the 4%. So in 2021, his bill would have been the same thing, $5,879. Former County Commissioner Lauren Groskoff, Mr. Chairman, and he did want me to use his house as an example. He went up 14% this year. So he lives up by the golf course. That neighborhood. Now, this is his bill right now. It's $4,174. Yes, I'll explain that with his schedule. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2020, though, his bill going up to 4% a year would have been $2,643. For roll back to 2021, it would have still been $3,124, so he would have saved $1,000. On his schedule this year, he saved $378 because he went up 14%. So that was a good savings for him because that's what started it. He came in saying, I went 14%. I had to show him that at the bottom of the schedule saying, hey, you're not paying taxes on that bill anymore. So. And so when we discussed the rollback, I know you had the Department of Revenue check into it, Mr. Chairman, but they're really not the ones who can do it. I mean, I think it has to fall locally. We know where the data is. We know how to check for new construction. We know how to check for the inequities that are going out there. And it is complicated. It's not going to be easy. I was just looking for a new starting point in 2025, and I believe Park County's confident we can do it for our county. Now, whether all counties should do that, I really don't know. I've showed you that we could do it and still survive, and quite easily, rolling from 2020, 10 million, we wouldn't have the 12 million, and we don't have a problem spending it. I don't think any of the counties have a problem spending money. I've heard elected officials around this state say, if we can't figure out how to spend it, we'll put it in the bank, which is, I think, one of the worst things you can do. And I don't think you should be saying that because it's not your money. It's the taxpayers' money. You shouldn't be allowed these huge reserves just because you can't find enough to spend it on right now. but you can't give it back to them. So that's why limits is probably our best thing to control this. And you know where you can budget now. I mean, nobody could budget in 21, 22, and 23. It was ridiculous. Increases by 25%, sometimes 45%, in quite a few counties. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Quick question on page 2, where you've got, the assessed valuation of Park County. So that's the total assessed valuations.
That's correct.
Now, is that so that's not just residential?
No, that's the total
commercial
one, yes.
And mineral, what percentage of that is residential? And
I don't have that broke out, Mr. Chairman, right at the moment. I was going to do it like that, but I wanted to show you the whole thing. I can get that information if we're going to continue these conversations at the next
so
meeting.
so my question then, when you
Yeah,
go to the
we're gonna
far-
lose money,
Let me
Mr. Chair.
finish here.
Yes.
Let me ask the question. Okay, on 20 and 21 there on page 2, on the far right columns, so when you show the difference in those taxes, if there was a rollback, is that just a rollback of residential, or is that a rollback of all the grand total roll and even minerals and commercial and industrial? It's just residential property?
Just residential property. And just the improvement, not the land.
Yeah,
at this point.
okay, I just want to make sure, because
Yeah.
the total
This
is
is-
everything.
right.
But the difference is just with residential.
Yes.
Okay.
And this is just showing the county 12 mills. This
Yeah.
is just what the county does.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
not the
very
whole
good.
thing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Members, any questions? Assessor? Okay. Did you? Okay, Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Meyer, so how do you answer the question about the varying levels of taxes that would inevitably happen if you did a rollback? We talked about thousands of new properties around the state. So, similar to Representative Zwanitser's question about the handful of people who got a hold of him saying, wait, we didn't get the 4%. So we heard a lot of testimony during session about the iniquities that causes. How do you answer that in the administration of this?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Oakley, yes, if you remember my presentation, I copied a lot off Arizona. I've got 23 pages of rules to stop the inequities. I have contacts in Arizona, another chief deputy assessor, that really put it out. When you buy a house, you don't go directly to market value there. You go to a limited tax value by analyzing stuff. They do it different. But I think, because as I mentioned before in testimonies, Mr. Chairman, Representative Oakley, they do fair market value and limited tax value, and both of them are right on your assessment schedule. So it's a little easier than us calling this an exemption, where, I mean, it's still the same thing, and it could probably still be done. I don't think it's an emergency right now, but it will be, and it's going to create some major problems in the end of having two like houses, one paying this and one paying that. And we should have your team, Mr. Chairman, check into this. Now, I'm happy to give whoever you're having research this, all the information and my contact, so you can look at it and come up with something for yourself, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in essence, going below market value is the answer.
Well, if you're, Mr.
Assessor?
Chairman, Representative Oakley, it's going to happen. In Arizona, the only time they ever hit market value and weren't using limited value was in 2008. Their market crashed, is what he told me. So then you were at market value, but no, we would never, I would assume that we're never getting to market value when we do this, but we didn't need the money. And I don't, if you guys want to keep doing exemptions and trying to get them through every time, they're Band-Aids. This is a solution to the problem of people coming in and paying so much and driving our markets up. This is a solution that we can live without it. We can, it's, again, it's not what you're going to lose. It's what did you need in the first time to continue to do your roads, your supply, your sheriff's department and so forth.
Okay. One more follow-up? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you discussed that Park County exempting Teton as being the highest, but of course, as we sit here, we are talking about making statewide policy. So I guess then how do you answer for, if we're making statewide policy because of these increases, presumably in a couple of these other counties, and then along with that, you're talking about the need for money. Has your county lowered your mills?
Go ahead, Assessor.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Oakley, no, our county hasn't lowered our mills ever. We just don't lower our mills. We'd lose too much money on oil and gas production. For every mill, you'd lose $375,000. You have an education problem in this state of they're not allowed to lower their mills. So it doesn't matter how much they're getting. They get it all. So they can't lower their mills by statute. So we don't have that. It's a whole new way, Representative Oakley, of, we're never going back to market value as long as you limit this for your needs and don't worry about how much money you're going to lose or have, because this could happen again to us where we start going up in double digits again. But this time we'd have it under control.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
Okay, I think Senator French, and then we're going to go down to this end of the table next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since I've been made an example of, I had to say something. Since if we roll back to 2021, then the assessed valuation is less, correct? How do we do that? Like,
The assessed valuation,
Ward to the chair, are you finished with your question?
not quite. Like in my example, residential goes down almost 200,000. So with all the residential dropping considerably back, how does that all factor into things?
Assessor, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator French, the only reason I showed you 21 is if you didn't want to lose, as you'll see in 2020, if you look at the last year, you'd be at $10,406,000. If you look at 2021, you'd be at $10,647 altogether. On your value, Senator French, you didn't really go up in 2021. You stayed the same. You didn't go up to 4%. So even from 20 to 21, he was one of the lucky ones. I mean, we averaged 10%, but that neighborhood, he lives in a rural area. I imagine there wasn't any much sales activity going on in there. So he got lucky, I would have to say, but not so much in 2021. And then 22 and 23, you went way up. And that's what hit, along with everybody else went up those years. Those were the main ones. So I'm not saying, even in the presentation, it was in there, rollbacks, and we gave you a year, that was going to be your decision. Yes, you won't, if you roll back to 2020, it's going to be a little bit. If you roll back to 2021, it'll be a little bit more. It's just you're starting off with a different year.
I'm going to move down to this end of the table. I think Representative Locke is next, and then Senator Hyde, and then we'll come back here to this end of the table.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just talking about, I was just looking at the median household income, and I know this is a snapshot in 1 year, but looking at the median household income over the last 10 years, and as it turns out, I could finally find it. I was just looking at Park County. So for lack of a better term, it's been relatively flat. So you're talking significant property tax increases just over the last 4 years, based on your analysis. And I'm looking at a 10-year cycle on the median household income in Park County. And it's up a little bit in 2023, but quite frankly, over the last 10 years, it's relatively flat. So you're looking at not only property taxes carving deeper into everyone's pocket. So we're for lack of a better term, if this were to continue, it would be a death spiral. At least that's my interpretation. That being said, have you done that kind of analysis? It says, hey, it's increasing, our property tax are increasing at this level, and median household incomes are increasing only at this level. Not that that's specifically in your queue, but have you looked at it? Because I sense that whether you've looked at the numbers or not, you're feeling it from the people. That's what I perceive as the reality when I look at your concern here, which I agree with. So just your thoughts on that. This is kind of what goes through my head is median household incomes are flat, property tax is shooting through the roof, and everybody knows that's just one factor because insurance is too. That being said, I just would be curious your thoughts on that as well, if you've looked at that or if you have an opinion on that. Thank you.
Assessor, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Locke, yes, we have looked at that. And yes, that is the main problem, plus interest rates being up. That's why what happened was the people who are coming to Park County, they're paying cash. We see it all the time. It's not hitting them. But for our plumbers, our welders, they're moving to Powell, but now Powell is, according to the study that we were just reading, is the fourth most expensive place in the state, with Cody being the one. Well, number two, Representative Storer, and you know, you guys are always number one, but we are the highest, our highest living conditions. To live in Park County is the most expensive place in the state. And that was Cody, I'm afraid, Cody. Powell is number 4. But in answer to your question, Representative Locke, yes, we have been studying wages. I do have that information, and that's exactly what is happening in Park County. And that's why I'm here to talk about just Park County, because Wyoming's never rolled back or did anything like this. So where is the law that says everybody has to roll back, you know, to a different thing if they needed the money? I mean, you guys get to make that law, and maybe should it be in the hands of the locals, most likely the county commissioners? Should they have to make that choice? I've showed them how much money they're gonna lose. I've also showed them how much money they're gonna need, that they could do it. But it's not gonna be an assessor's call. And I don't think it should be the legislation's cause for the entire state. You know, I think it should be on a county by county situation. So the county commissioners can go say, hey, we can't pay the bills if we do something like this. So that's what I was talking about.
Okay, do you have a follow-up? I was going to go to Senator Ide here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for bringing this to attention. But in fact, this is affecting almost, maybe not all, but most of the counties, because when you look at that median household income over time, everybody's saying property taxes are going up, and median household income across the state for that 10-year window is fairly flat. So, but thank you for bringing this data up. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ide?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. More of a comment than anything. Assessor Meyer, thanks for being here. Thanks for your diligence. You're always coming in on Zoom or showing up at these. And I appreciate your comments on, defending the taxpayer. I mean, that's part of what your job is there too, and that you don't need the money. And if you don't need the money, what is the solution? And thanks for being here for trying to figure out part of the solutions. And maybe, like you said, county by county, it's like the states, they're all little experiments. And, but if I lived in Park County, I'd vote for you for assessor. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move down.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, nobody's ever ran against me for assessor. Nobody wants this job.
Nobody wants that job. Yeah, okay, very good. Okay, going to go down here to Representative Byron.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Assessor Meyer, for being here. Thank you for all these numbers, and we might be, my colleague over to my left, we might be number one in a lot of categories, but we're number 22 on the plate. So real quick, have you applied House Bill 3 to any of these stats you ran?
Explain House Bill 3 again to everybody here.
House Bill 3 is, it's the property tax exemption for long-term homeowners. Doesn't go into effect last year. The DOR very kindly just explained it prior to this hour. So I'm just wondering, it's a 50% reduction, if you're over 65 and have paid in Wyoming for 25 years. So I'm just curious if, and all these wonderful, and the examples you use on some of my colleagues on my right and my left on their tax bill, if you've applied, assuming that they may qualify for House Bill 3, have you ran this statistical analysis with that,
Okay, Assessor.
that bill?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Byron, no. I'm still under the fact that if we kept going up, well, to answer your question is, we don't know yet. I don't know how many 65-year-olds we have that have been in here 25 years. We'll find that. There's also a sunset on that bill of 2 years, I don't know if that's going to stay around, especially when we've solved our problem, as far as I'm concerned, with the rollback. A lot of these exemptions wouldn't be so important to have if we would have solved this before. We just solved it late. So we'd be in the same boat if we started this in 2020 was our start year. We went to 2021. If we were doing that all along, you'd still pass that bill. Yeah, it could hurt. It could hurt you. I don't know how much. I will have that answer for you next year when we see what exactly happened in this year and if it's going to continue to go on.
Okay, very good. Senator French.
In defense of House Bill 3, since it's been a long time since I've been 65, so I'm local, born and raised in Park County, had a house for 50 years, so I'm way past the 25-year thing. So, and now, everybody saw my tax bill of close to $6,800. I'm now on a fixed income. That's a major deal. And this, that's major for myself and my wife and a lot of others out there that are in that situation. So, I think Brenda Henson said 6,500 people statewide. I'd like to see that be permanent, because as people enter into it, hit 65 or hit the 25-year residency thing, there's also people that are going to be selling, moving away, passing away, whatever. So there's people coming into that, there's people going out of that. And I tell you, since I've hit all those things, it's going to be a real challenge to live reasonably and pay a big tax bill like that. So I think House Bill 3, it doesn't affect that many people, but it's a good thing for some of them. I remember, I think it was Senator Larson and I were at the Powell Senior Citizens Center. They wanted us to come talk to them about taxes and a few things. And God, it just broke my heart. There was a lady there that just begging us to do something, that she had lost her husband and older lady, and her income was $600. $600 a month. She said, I literally cannot pay anything on my tax bill. I'm gonna have to sell the house and move away. So something like this can help a little bit. Is it the answer to everything? No, but I think, we're gonna find out that it helps a lot of people.
Mr. Chairman,
Hey,
yes.
any other,
Senator French, I'm totally in agreement with you on that. I mean, I'd like to see it go on forever. I don't know how much. I'm sure Park County, again, will be able to do it. you know, we'd be fine, but I don't know about other counties. Again, you know, if they're going to be able to maintain that stuff, but I'm totally in agreement. I'd like to see it forever. I made it to the 65.
Yeah, I think, you know, you go back, can't remember all that, but there was a group that wanted to make all of our property tax bills sunset so we continue to look at them. So if we broke something or needed to fix something or tweak something, that we'd be coming back and always kind of have it as a topic of discussion. So I think that was really the intent, as I recall that bill, not to just do a 2-year deal, but to do a 2-year so we continue to look at it. Okay, I think we're about ready to wrap this up. Okay, any other? Okay, appreciate you being here and driving down, coming to Casper. Appreciate your service as an assessor in the second fastest. Well, I don't think you're second. I think it's Lincoln County had the highest. But appreciate you being here, Assessor. Okay, next on our agenda, and let me just ask one more time, any more public comment? There wasn't anyone, you were the only one, but is there anybody here would like to comment on our property tax bills? We're on this part of our agenda, the bills that we passed back in the last couple sessions, because we're going to move on to personal property tax. Go ahead, come on up if you want to. We're going to move on to personal property tax after we finish here. Good morning.
Good morning. I'll be brief. Thank you, committee. And I followed a lot. My name is Ross Schriftman. I'm a citizen of Casper. I live about 2 miles up over that way. And I appreciate everything that this committee did and the other members of the legislature during the budget session. Got a little convoluted because there's a lot of different things. My personal situation, I moved to Casper from Pennsylvania 3 years ago. Part of the reason I moved here was lower taxes. However, in the 3 years I've been here, my property tax has gone up 70%. And as Representative Locke had said, that's just one cost. My income is less than flat because I'm semi-retired. So I'm going back to work. Residential values don't necessarily, for most people, don't increase their income. It actually is an expense. And when the value of the home goes up and replacement costs go up, your insurance goes up as well. So we're all dealing with inflation. It's been a big problem. Whether the solution is I guess it's called a clawback to an earlier time, or maybe an exemption on the first $100,000 of value seems to make sense to me. Also, acquisition value, what somebody buys your property for, what the buyer and seller agree to, is really what the price of an item is, whether it's a home or something else. So I hope you consider that. I was a little surprised at the governor's reasoning for his veto of one of the bills that I thought was pretty good, that the legislature passed. He called it socialism, and I don't know what his background as far as economic study, but in basic economics in college, it's not socialism where we keep our money. It's the opposite. And just because wealthier people get a tax break as well as everybody else doesn't make it socialism. So thank you again for all your work.
Questions for Mr. Schriftman? Okay, thanks for being here.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate you. Thanks. Anyone else? Okay, we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda is personal property tax. I have a presentation in the Department of Revenue. Good morning. Thank you for your work on this, and go ahead and introduce yourself and go ahead and get started. The floor is yours. Now, just remind folks, if they're watching online, all these materials are available online. I'm going to screen share this, but it's available to you online as well, and it'll be there permanently. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Ken Giel. I'm with the Department of Revenue. I'm the administrator of the Property Tax Division, and I appreciate the time this morning. The chairman asked us to give you a brief overview of the personal property tax in Wyoming and how it's administered. So this is a pretty high-level overview. We're not going to get too deep in the weeds. And with that, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like me to start, I will. All right. So what is personal property? What is tangible personal property? It's a physical item that you can touch or see. Some examples, as you can see here, tractors, computers, airplanes, heavy machinery, oil well, wind turbines in a wind farm. Personal property is something that you can touch and see. I'm not sure why it's doing that, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. All right, and other types of personal property are called intangible personal property. So that would be like bonds, notes, cash, trusts, patents, annuities, mortgages, copyrights, insurance policies. That is not taxable in the state of Wyoming. So that is intangible personal property and is not taxable in the state of Wyoming currently. So this is how many accounts that we have in the statewide CAMA system. And when I say the word account, that means it's a unique identifying number. So account number 1, account number 2, account number 3, could be different companies, could be the same company, could be the same company reporting in different tax districts, et cetera. So it's just a unique identifier. There could be one item, one asset on an account. There could be 20,000 assets on one account. So this is just a number of the accounts statewide from our CAMA system. For business personal property accounts, we have around almost 28,000, and for oil and gas accounts in the CAMA system, we have 5,700. I will say, just as a side note, this count may be a little low, but it may not include the de minimis accounts that we'll talk about later in this presentation. It may not include those in these numbers, just depending on how they're stored in the CAMA system. Some folks are putting them in a temporary status, and then they go ahead and send a declaration to those de minimis accounts and get updated on a yearly basis. So personal property, assessed valuation. This, as you can see, I've broken it down by commercial, industrial, residential, and state assessed. So state assessed personal property is kind of a unique animal, if you will. Most of the property that we appraise at the Department of Revenue is personal property. We're estimating about 95% of the property that we appraise is personal property. Now, keep in mind, a lot of that personal property that we're valuing never is in the state of Wyoming, because we're valuing the company as a whole, and then we're doing the proration part to Wyoming. So that satellite that's out in space, it's never going to be here in Wyoming, and it never intends to be here in Wyoming, that we're valuing for maybe a satellite or cable company. So it is a total estimate. I checked with a few other states, and on centrally assessed or state assessed accounts, Colorado was at about 92%, and most of the states were anywhere between 90 and 95. And my appraisers at the department, they estimated about 95%. So that gives you a total of how much personal property is out there in Wyoming. You're at about $4.241 billion assessed value. Going on to the next slide, this is just for information. I thought I'd break this down a little bit by manufacturers or by the industrial personal property.
Yeah, I think you're going to get, can you just go back one slide?
Absolutely, yes.
And I think members, if you have questions, just stop us at those slides while we're talking. So you've got the commercial, industrial, residential, and the state assessed on slide 5. And you can see the values underneath. So this residential personal property that is above the de minimis amount, or do these include de minimis? That doesn't include de minimis amounts because we don't assess them, right?
Correct, Mr. Chairman, the de minimis amounts are not in there.
So give us an example of residential personal property that's in there.
Probably in this slide, in these numbers, it will probably be mobile homes. It could be a few other items too. If you own a rental and you're supplying a washer, a dryer, a dishwasher, those sorts of things, that could be considered business personal property and taxable. So it could be some of that. I would say a majority of these, of this number here is mobile homes statewide.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This next slide, I broke it down by industry. In the CAMA system, we have something that we call an abstract code. That abstract code basically identifies what type of property that is. So as you go down this list, we have a certain abstract code for food manufacturing, for industrial personal property, beverage. We don't have any tobacco manufacturing in Wyoming, just so you know. We also, unspecified other, we don't use that anymore. So we have found that all property that we are appraising in the state fits under one of these abstract codes pretty well. You can see we have beverage, we have textile, computer. You'll notice oil and gas extraction is the largest number of the industrial personal property, followed by coal mining there, or well, followed by petroleum and coal product manufacturing, and then coal mining. So this is just a breakdown, just for your information. I didn't want to go through line by line, but I can answer any questions if you have them, Mr. Chairman. Okay, there are three generally accepted valuation methods used in the assessment of personal property and really of all property. So you have the income approach to value, and that is the property's ability to generate income. It's an income approach. It's one way of valuing all property, but in this case, we're talking about personal property. Now, typically, the income approach on personal property would be a leasing company. Let's say a company owns a lot of well, this time of year, people are getting their yards ready, and let's say they own a bunch of rototillers and that sort of equipment that you would go down and rent. That would probably be the best approach for this type of property, for that type of property. We have the sales comparison approach. I think everyone's they know what the sales comparison approach is. Something sells, and you look at those and you compare, see what the differences are. So it's based on sales of property. And then we have the third approach to value, which is the cost approach. This is most commonly used for personal property because it's easy to find those costs and those original costs. So that's probably used the most. And of course, it's based on the replacement cost minus the depreciation of the property. So depreciation of the property would be wear and tear. It would be maybe some functional obsolescence. So maybe you have a piece of machinery that's older and there's better technology out there now. So maybe there's some functional obsolescence with that property, which would be depreciation. So let's talk about replacement cost new. And this is just an example here. And so this approach to value begins with an estimated replacement cost new derived from market data of similar properties. So we look at market data of a widget to see what the replacement cost new is. Then we don't have any trending or adjustment for that. And then we depreciate that property for, again, like we talked about, wear and tear, maybe some obsolescence, some functional obsolescence. And that gives us our replacement cost new, RCN, less depreciation, which is RCNLD. So when we're just an example here, we begin with a reported, so this is the trended type. We begin with the reported installed historical cost and date of that asset. And then we trend from the date above to today's dollar. We get an estimate of the replacement cost new. Then we applied depreciation for age, wear and tear, obsolescence, et cetera. And resulting value is determined to be the asset's market value. And on the next slide, I did an example, and if you remember, almost a year ago, Mr. Chairman, in Sheridan, we had this almost same example of a tractor. So this tractor was purchased 19 years ago. Its life expectancy on this tractor was 10 years. It was purchased for $16,000, and our trending factor to today's dollar is 2.2123. So the replacement cost new of that tractor, almost 30 years ago, is $35,397. And then we apply depreciation to that. So we end up with it being 20% good or 80% depreciation. So we have a final value of $7,000 times the level of assessment, and we talked about that earlier, 9.5% on all other property. So that's 673 taxable value or assessed value times the average mill levy, and I'm just using the average mill levy statewide. So $45.88 would be the tax dollar on that tractor or that asset. So just a footnote down there, trending is a method of estimating a property's RCN in which an index or trend factor is applied to the property's historical cost to convert the known cost into an indication of current cost. So we're looking at yesterday's dollars, bringing them to today's dollars, to put that simply.
Representative Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm just trying to understand all these different things. For example, when you talk about the replacement cost function, this is literally, I bought a tractor 20 years ago at $16,000, and let's say inflation has made that into a $90,000 tractor today, and I start throwing in depreciation factors. It doesn't matter. My costs are going to go up, right? My personal property tax have the potential of going up, for example. Is that relatively accurate considering depending on how much inflation you're dealing with? Is that roughly an accurate analysis? Because you're chasing a replacement value cost, right? So it didn't cost me that. Perfect example, probably couldn't afford to replace my home as a perfect example. So here, when you start throwing these depreciation factors on top of an escalating replacement value cost, there's no, I better be careful about saying it's realistic, but the point is, you're just chasing this constantly rising number with a depreciation cost, and the person's never getting a break for the fact this tractor's 20 years old. Is that a fairly accurate representation of what's happening there?
Go ahead, Mr. Gill.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that's a great question. So those trending factors, we're appraisers. We're appraising property. So it wouldn't matter if you were appraising a piece of jewelry. It wouldn't matter if you were appraising a car. We're appraising property here. So as an appraiser, we need to get to the closest value to replace that, or we could use the other two approaches, right? We could use the sales comparison, what they're selling for, or we could use the income approach, how much income it generates. So we're appraisers. We're appraising the property. And yes, some of those historical trending factors, yeah, they jump. You're exactly right. You look back in inflationary years throughout the past 100 years, and you can see where they were. You can see where those inflationary factors were. And then you'll see when we didn't have inflation, where that one-year-old asset, there's hardly any appreciation on that to get to the replacement cost new. So yes, it does follow inflation, and that's a great observation, Representative.
Okay, thank you. Representative Zwanitzer?
Thanks. Is there anything in Wyoming statute that treats personal property differently, if it's corporate versus small business versus agricultural, et cetera? And do you know if any other states have different tier systems when they calculate personal property, if they give any type of discounts or exemptions, et cetera, across the board for if it's, a small business or an agricultural? I know that federal government does, but anything the state government does?
Mr. Gill?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that's a great question. Actually, we're going to get to that in this presentation too, a piece of it. But yeah, states do treat them all differently. In Wyoming, yeah, we do have a de minimis, and we'll talk about that soon. So we do treat some business personal property differently than other, but not to size of corporation, not to ma and pa versus an online retailer here or something like that.
Okay, thank you. Continue.
So just some of the statutes, all taxable property shall be annually listed, valued, and assessed for taxation in the county which it's located in the name of the owner on January 1. So we all know January 1 is the lien date in Wyoming every year. And going on in that same title, 39-13-107, the county assessor shall obtain from each property owner a full, complete, and detailed statement of the amount of taxable property owned. And it goes on to say some other language there. If a property owner fails to provide a listing of personal property by March 1, the assessor shall issue an assessment from the best information available. So possibly the assessor would look at a similar situated property and estimate the value for that company. The deadline for that can be extended to April 1st if the assessor receives a written request by February 15th. And I think it actually shall be, it typically is granted for the extension there. And then very important at the very bottom, all taxpayer returns and return information shall be confidential. So as I was preparing this, we'll see some examples of declarations. They're made up companies. So I'm not exposing any confidential information here, Mr. Chairman. So here is the ATD 25. This is a commercial business personal property declaration that every business receives. Typically, if they've been in business before, the assets that they've listed from the very first time maybe will still be on this list until that business owner crosses it off. So a business owner has a front end loader and he retires that and it's still on this list. He's going to simply cross that off and get rid of it so it's no longer taxable. Being a self-reporting state, kind of important for the business owners to watch and make sure they're not being taxed for something that they no longer own. So being a self-reporting state, it is putting both the assessor and the business owners, they working together to make sure that the right assets are being taxed. This is the second page. This second page basically is where the business owner, if they were leasing some equipment from another company, so a common one would be we're leasing a copier from XYZ Corporation, and so they would list that there. What the assessor does with that leased information then is then he will reach out to that company that is leasing that equipment and put it on XYZ Copier Corporation's declaration to pay the personal property tax. Now, we do see there are times when there's a contractual agreement between that leasing company and whoever has that asset in their possession. Sometimes the company that has the asset in their possession needs to pay those personal properties. Sometimes the corporation pays it. It varies. It varies by company. This is a printout report. It's a personal property report from the CAMA system. So in any county, all 23, you will get this report. Of course, you have to be the owner of this report or a representative of the owner. This again is confidential information. And I just wanted to show you some of the things on this report as we go across, and I know it's kind of hard to see, but you see you have the original cost there on the first line of 14.5, and it's a computer server. It has a 6-year life expectancy. So we're trending it because it was bought in 2022, so it's only a year old. The trend factor was 1.017, so not a huge trending factor for 1 year old. So the RCN is 14,752, and then computer equipment declines very quickly, as we all know, as technology moves every day. It's only 73% good, and it's only about 2 years old now at this point. So its assessed value ends up being $1,023. You can see its actual value is $10,769, and 2 years ago, it was purchased for $14,500. So it's, on this type of equipment, it does depreciate very quickly. This next form is our ADT 40. This is for our oil and gas companies. They fill this out for the oil and gas equipment that they have in the field. And as you can see, this is a made-up company again. I just put a few lines of data in there. You can see how they report what year it was installed, or year built possibly, or maybe year acquired. Those all could be different possibly. And then the reported cost. And again, the second page of that is any equipment that they might be leasing. In that case, it may be compressors or something like that you see most common in that. From our tractor example earlier, that trending factor, it was a 1995 tractor. We saw this table comes from our personal property manual, and we publish this yearly. So the trending factor on that 1995 trailer was 2.2123. And then the percent good table, so how good is this property? How much life does it have left, basically, for a better way of putting it? It's over our chart, so it's only 20% good or 80% depreciated. So I thought I'd go to some local assessed value personal property. And I've broken this down by county. I broke it down again by commercial, residential, industrial, state, and a total. Again, keeping in mind the state is an estimate of that personal property. And just what 1 mill will generate, what 3 mills will generate, what 8 mills will generate, 12, and then the 25 and 6 local school mills. So just for your information of what it would generate based on the valuation. Would you like me to move on, Mr. Chairman? Okay. Okay, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So the value of property for a specific use implies that the equipment is installed in a continual use for generating income or performing its function. So it's value in use. So if it's still in use and still has value to it, in Wyoming currently, it is still taxable. So this is something from the Tax Foundation, and this is very, very, very new chart that Jared put together. Very well done report. I just wanted to show you some of the states, and what they're doing with business personal property and how they're changing. And there's a couple slides down that we'll get into nearby states and other states that don't tax personal property. Wyoming there, it's showing fully taxed, but just like in the footnote, Kentucky has a $1,000 de minimis or $1,000 exemption. So they did not include it to be significant, and Wyoming's de minimis is $2,400. So they didn't consider it to be very significant and didn't include it in the map. But we do have a de minimis law on the books. So let's talk about the de minimis law. The 66th legislature passed Senate File 85. I believe that was sponsored by Senator Ellis at the time. Made it effective 1/1 of 2022. If a person owns $2,400 or less in fair market value of business property in one county, the business property shall be exempt as de minimis business property. As used in this paragraph, business property means taxable personal property excluding any property that is exempt under 3911-105A as personal property held for personal or family use. So in other words, if I have a small company and my only asset is this laptop that is $700, I am exempt from personal property tax on this. It's not an exemption to everyone of $2,400. Your company has to own $2,400 in assets or less. So it's only, it was a little confusing to administer at the beginning, being an assessor, but I think we've figured it out in the CAMA system. Now, many of these companies still report on a yearly basis. They may still only have their $700 laptop, but they still will report. Some companies, they had the $700 laptop and they added a $3,000 generator to make sure it keeps running, something like that. Terrible example, but now they're no longer exempt and they need to pay business personal property tax. Now, this law also changed something that was, we're not sure anyone was ever prosecuted on this. So that if you didn't report previously, it was a misdemeanor, could carry a fine of $500 or 90 days in jail. That was removed in that session in the 66th. And the current law for non-reporting, you may address a civil fee of $5 a day, not to exceed $250. So obviously, I don't think anyone was ever prosecuted on the previous law, but it was important. It was important to this committee at that time to change that and just put a nominal fee there for non-reporting.
Co-chair has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the de minimis, wouldn't it be easier to do a flat rate exemption for everybody to, like, say, $2,400, $5,000, whatever that number is, just blanket across the board? Wouldn't that be easier to do? And is that something you would be interested in us pursuing, or is it fine the way it is?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, that's a great question, and that is up to this body and the legislative body. If you wish to exempt more personal property than what our de minimis is, the legislature has the ability to exempt it. And actually, we'll get to a state that exempted a lot of personal property this last year, and I think you'll find it a very interesting slide. But that would totally up to this legislative body of whether you want to, exempt the first 100,000 of everyone. That is totally in the legislator's hands. So just some states that don't tax personal property. So North Dakota does not tax personal property, but they have an individual and a corporate income tax. South Dakota does not tax personal property in most cases, but they do tax the state assessed personal property. So anything that the Department of Revenue would value, they do still tax that. But a normal business, a mom and pop, a Walmart, a large corporation, they would not pay property tax on their business personal property.
Sales taxes, a couple pennies higher, and property taxes, real property is much higher.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it is. I don't know about their sales tax. That's definitely not in my wheelhouse at all.
Yeah, sure.
But
Okay, go ahead.
definitely.
That was a comment. Don't you agree?
Sure.
And you can't agree on that, but I'm seeing head nods.
Absolutely. But we do have a sales tax expert in the room that could help us with that for sure. New Mexico, some limited personal property, but they do have an individual income tax and corporate. Iowa, individual and corporate. Minnesota, again, some of the state assessed property is taxed, but they also have an individual and corporate income tax. Wisconsin, same way. Illinois, individual and corporate income tax. And that one was, reading on them, it was very interesting doing this. The revenue generated from personal property was replaced by a personal property replacement tax in the 70s. So it's a PPRT is an income tax on corporations, and the revenues are primarily allocated to local entities. So that was really interesting what Illinois did in the 70s. Ohio, both a state and local income tax. It does not have a corporate income tax, but they do have a gross receipts tax. Pennsylvania, individual and corporate. New York does some of the state assessed property, and they have individual and corporate income. New Jersey, highest property tax in the country. They do still tax some of the state assessed property, and they also have an individual and corporate income tax. New Hampshire, no income tax on individuals, but there is a tax on interest and dividends, and they also have a corporate income tax. And Delaware, again, individual and corporate. So some of our neighboring states, the very first slide goes to the co-chairman's question. Recently, Idaho exempted 90% of all businesses at a cost of about 1.1% of property tax collections. So in other words, it's the larger corporations paying the majority of the business personal property, and the small businesses are not paying any. So that was Idaho. Colorado recently raised the de minimis exemption from $50 or $250 from $7,900, and that was, I think, this last session. South Dakota exempts most personal property from taxation, and we talked about that earlier. Montana exempts the first 100,000 of taxable market value. Utah exempts the aggregate fair market value of 27,000 or less, and Nebraska taxes all tangible personal property, at least right now, as we know today. But I think you're going to find out a little bit more about that later on. This is another map from the Tax Foundation, a great source of information. If you ever want to go to their website, they have a lot of research that they've done. Tax business climate, Wyoming again is number one, and we have been for quite a while. So I kind of just broke down their spreadsheet just to states that are kind of in our vicinity here, and gave you the overall rank of those states, as you can see. And it breaks down the corporate tax rank, the individual income tax rank, sales tax, and property tax of states in this region, and also unemployment insurance tax. Just thought it might be an interesting slide for you.
On 27, on property tax rank, these are just on commercial and industrial?
I believe it, the gentleman that put this together, he'll be here.
Yeah.
And that would be a great question for him. I know that's probably not something he's here to talk about, but
Yeah.
I honestly don't know that answer, Mr.
No
Chairman.
worries. Thank you. Representative Bear has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. This number one ranking is a great thing. I'm just curious, do you share that information annually with the Wyoming Business Council, who is tasked with inviting businesses to Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman, I don't personally, and probably the department doesn't either. The Tax Foundation is a large think tank in the country, so I'm sure that the Business Council refers to a lot of their research on a regular basis, like a lot of folks in taxation do. This group does a lot of research, and it's usually very good and usually very accurate. So yeah, I don't report it to them though, sir. One of the topics in the interim meeting was the basic equipment list. I think you remember hearing about that, some testimony on that. And from my research, we've only found one state that does something like that, and that is the state of Colorado. And it was developed quite a few years ago, and I know there's folks in this room that could speak to the Bell because they've personally experienced the Bell in their corporations. But it was developed to provide Colorado County assessors with a guide to help them identify and uniformly value oil and gas equipment. and it's only for oil and gas equipment, is really not much different than what we're currently doing in the state of Wyoming. We have to have a detailed list from the property owner, and then we have to value those properties. Now, I will say one of the differences is every year a business is reporting every asset they own. But as I said before, on our declarations that we send out, that equipment's already in the CAMA system and already being reproduced on that report. So any additions or retirements of equipment is really all they need to report. Very similar to what's happening in Colorado. One of the things in Colorado's Chapter 6 of the basic equipment list, and their Chapter 6 is a guide for assessors. And basically, it would be much like Department of Revenue rules. Once the legislature passes something, then the department usually has to promulgate rules to make sure it can be administrated. So very much similar to our rules. I thought it was interesting that they said more than likely, and this is in their Chapter 6, more than likely, this approach, the Bell approach, will end in a very similar value as just doing a regular appraisal, one of the three approaches to value that we talked about earlier. So I thought that was very interesting. One problem I do see, I think there's a misconception out there that, okay, at this depth, you're going to have just this equipment, and that's it. And I could see where that could happen. A company doesn't report, let's say down in Colorado, so that company might be being taxed for equipment they don't have. So unless they are keeping on top of their reporting with their local county government. This is just a table from the Bell, and this is in the, I'm not sure what basin that is, but they have a lot of basins in the state of Colorado, and that's the equipment that they expect to be on site. So anything that's additional needs to be added. Anything that's not on that site needs to be subtracted, and then they give you a value. At the bottom of the chart, you see that's the depth, and on the left-hand side, that's the barrels. So that equipment, if it was 3,000 deep and producing 900 barrels, the valuation of that equipment would be $248,794. So in Wyoming, we also produce a personal property manual, and it's a large manual, and you can go to our website, and I'll take you there on our website before we get done here. We provide this to all county assessors, and it talks about, discovery of personal property, the assessment policy, Wyoming law. There's even a section of oil field safety, because we want our field appraisers out there to be safe when they're out on these sites. And then for the assessor's offices only, we contract with a vendor that gives us valuation of common oil and gas equipment. So very similar to what Colorado's doing. They're saying all this equipment's there. Well, we're providing that to our assessor's offices currently. So we contract it on a yearly basis. They provide that, and then we provide that to the assessors. So if they run across a piece of equipment that wasn't reported, or they're not sure what it is, we have pictures, we have values, we can show them, or we give them an ability to value that asset without, if it wasn't reported by the company. So it very, very similar to what Colorado's doing in a way. My next slide, I think, kind of drives home the difference between the Bell and the current method in Wyoming. In Wyoming, everything's valued at full value per the Constitution. All property shall be uniformly valued at its full value. In Colorado, everything's valued at its full value except for oil and gas equipment. So just a carve out there, just an interesting carve out in the state of Colorado. If it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, I would like to show our website and maybe just a brief example of the personal property manual. In fact, I downloaded it, so I'm gonna, to save time. Maybe. All right. Okay, there's the business personal property model manual that the department puts out on a yearly basis. Obviously, title page and that sort of thing. But I wanted to take you to near the end where we actually start giving some values to some of these equipments from our vendor. So we've had diagrams out there. We've worked with industry to help identify what these assets are, because most of us that are not in an oil field on a regular basis, it looks like a lot of lines and a lot of bolts and nuts and things like that. So we give pictures, we have prices or values, I should say, of common equipment, and this is what we share with the assessor. So we are giving them a tool to be able to value some of this equipment that they may not have a value for. So I think really, in essence, we are doing something very similar to the Bell, but we're still valuing uniformly in Wyoming.
And that manual, I would presume, it's updated all the time.
Mr. Chairman, it is. It's updated on a yearly basis.
Okay. Members, any questions? Mr. Gill, do you have anything else that you want to?
Mr. Chairman, that is the end of my presentation.
Okay, very good. Any questions, ma'am? We're going to, okay, Representative Storr has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Gill. I was curious if a piece of personal property is held within a trust. Does that make it not taxable?
Mr. Gill?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, so I guess we would, so if it's, let's say it's residential personal property, so your TV, your couch in your home, that is already exempted in Title 39. So whether it be in a trust or it be just in Joe Smith's name, it already is exempt. If it is for commercial purposes, it would still be taxable, whether it's in a trust or not.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, really appreciate your work and your presentation, and as we continue to study and work on this, we're going to take public comment, but I think we're going to just first take a short break and get everybody can stretch their legs a little bit, and then we'll come back and we'll start with public comment on personal property. We're a little bit ahead of schedule now, so we're doing good, but, and we'll stay on schedule for those folks who are coming this afternoon. Okay, so we'll take a short break here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Good morning again. After that extended break, we're back on time. We are now at this point on our agenda on the personal property tax on public comment. So we'd love to hear from folks in the room, or are there any online that want to, I don't think anybody, at least when I saw the sign up, it signed up for personal property comments. But if there are, we'll certainly take them. And then we'll have a few committee directives and we'll break for lunch. We're going to stay on this time, even though we're a little ahead, because there might be folks show up at 1:15, et cetera, for this afternoon. Okay, so good morning, welcome, and just introduce yourself, who you represent. Glad you're here.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Travis Deti. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Mining Association, and always a privilege to be before the Revenue Committee on a beautiful day in Casper. Our interest in the tangible personal property tax comes from earlier in the year in the session with Senator McEwen's bill. And there are smarter people at the table that can kind of talk a little bit more about some of the things that we'd like to see pursued. But I will speak to from the mining industry and specifically the coal industry. You know, we're looking for some relief. And I didn't give you my laundry list the last time I was in front of the committee, but I've got my fresh numbers for 2023, and I just would like to remind the committee, if you would indulge me for a minute. In 2023, we produced 237.1 million tons of coal. That was an increase over the previous year. We are down this year. We're down about 19% compared to where we were last year. A lot of that's due to low natural gas prices. We had a mild winter, and frankly, the utilities built up their stockpiles, and they're pretty well set. So we're hoping for a good hot summer and, you know, get some folks running their air conditioners. But of the total tax revenue picture for the state of Wyoming, we brought in an estimated $654.3 million to the state in 2023. A reminder that we pay a lot of taxes. We paid federal mineral royalties, $216.6 million to the state of Wyoming. That was our share out of $379 million that the companies paid. Severance tax, $185.8 million. Ad valorem on production, $167 million. State rents and royalties, and this number is based on previous years since we don't have this year's figures yet, but $25.1 million. We paid to the state $25.2 million in abandoned mine land fees. And a reminder, that's just the state share of a larger bill that goes to the federal government before distribution. Sales and use taxes, $19 million. Ad valorem on property, $16 million. For a total of, again, roughly $654.3 million to the state of Wyoming. And that excludes the $130 million that we paid to the federal government to fund the Black Lung Fund. So, you know, we're the most heavily taxed, heavily regulated industry in the state, probably in the country. We still employ over 5,000 people. 444,492 are in the Powder River Basin. The average wage of our coal mining jobs is $95,000 a year, well above the state average of about $53,000. And each of these jobs support another 2 jobs in the service and supply sector. And so, again, if the committee would indulge me, we've been under a lot of pressure if you've been reading the newspapers recently. There is an all-out federal assault on the coal industry, not only in Wyoming, but nationwide, but Wyoming is going to take the brunt of it with the EPA Clean Power Plan 2 regulations, and most recently with the BLM's decision up in the Powder River Basin to ban federal coal leasing. So what does that mean to Wyoming? Well, it means, you know, roughly $600 million a year. You know, you'll switch over to reclamation. You won't be collecting the severance taxes. You won't be collecting the federal royalties. And depending on, you know, your perspective on it, it's been said, well, this was happening naturally. The market's deciding. The market's deciding. And I would push back on that just a little bit. When you think about a market, you think about choices. And you don't have much choice when one of the options for generating electricity in the United States of America is overtaxed at the state level, is overregulated at the federal level, and then with the BLM's chicanery here, is now prohibited. So the market is not deciding. The market is being decided. So what can we do about it? I don't think there's anyone in this room that would just say, well, too bad, so sad, learn to code, let's just go with what's coming next. We got to fight. Everybody's got to fight. And we got to fight like we're the third monkey on the ramp to Noah's Ark and it's starting to rain. And so what can we do here in this committee? I would just say you can look at some avenues to where you can give the industry some relief. And, you know, and the tangible personal property tax is a good place to start. It could be some low-hanging fruit if it's done right. You know, and with that, I will turn it over to, you know, my colleagues here who are, again, a little bit smarter than me and can kind of walk you through some of the proposals that we'd like to say.
Turn it over.
And I would stand for questions, Mr.
Just
Chairman.
real quick, and you know, I appreciate read all of your announcements on behalf of the Wyoming Mining Association. They come to our legislative email. Appreciate what you're saying and what you're doing. And, you know, and I think just to remind people, you know, where we were 10 years ago, we were on the cusp of 500 million tons. I mean, 2011, 12, 15 years ago, I guess, but we crossed 400 million and we're ready to hit 500 million.
About 460 million.
Yeah, and the boom is on. And at that time, we were talking about exports, all these things, because we have the cleanest coal in the world. And then just to remind everybody that's out there listening, we got about 400 or 500 years supply of coal. So it's not like it's going away and naturally in 50 years. Can you comment on that, the supply that we have in the Powder River?
I can, Mr. Chairman. The resource is in the trillions of tons. Probably about roughly 50 billion tons of recoverable coal right now, but the total resource is massive, and that's coal that we can't get to today, but with technology, you could. With the BLM's ban, we've probably got about 19 years left right now. We've got about probably 3.2 billion currently under lease right now. And you just do the math on that, you know, the way we're using it right now. You know, I think there's the assumption, because of what's transpired recently with coal-fired plant closures, that the rest are going to close. And we're at that point right now where a lot of the closures that we've seen in the past were older plants that were going to close down anyways. But what we're seeing right now is the existing coal fleet, with a lot of the premature retirements that were on the board, have been pushed back, because we're starting to realize now this country is going to need a lot of electricity. The demand's going up, it's not going down. And, you know, Senator Barrasso said it just a couple of days ago, we're going to be adding another California's worth of electricity, you know, in probably the next decade. And it's not going to be generated by wind and solar. It's going to be fossil fuels. It's going to be coal, it's going to be gas, and hopefully bring some nuclear online. It's got to be reliable. So it's not going away, but with some of the restrictions that we put on it, you know, you're 16 to 19 years out, and then that's it, unless we can lease that federal coal again. So again, when I say, you know, we got to fight, you got to fight it through the administrative process. You got to fight. We're going to have to litigate. But what this body can do, because everyone says, and I believe this, everyone supports the coal industry in this state, because the coal industry supports everybody in this state. You know, and one of the ways that you can support the coal industry is give it a little tax relief, so that we can keep, you know, inflation is killing us. And obviously, you know, the operating costs have gone up. If you can give a little bit back so that the operators can, you know, can use that capital a little bit better to keep operating. And, you know, and our friends in the environmental movement, in the state, they always say, well, the 25-year-old academic study out of the University of Wyoming said severance tax cuts or tax cuts don't translate to jobs. Well, I would respectfully disagree, because I'm listening to the operators that say tax relief would help us out. So here's something that you can do.
Okay, let me, I don't want to get off the agenda, but just for, I think, our knowledge in the legislature, but let's say if there's a change in administration here in the general election, and, you know, and you live in this Democrat, Republican administrations and how leasing works, and leasing is really going to be a key part of this now. I mean, what's the timeline on it? Say, you know, next January 20th, new administration. It's not like they can change the lease. I mean, it's like I guess my question is it a 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 year process to say, hey, we're going to lease this stuff out to 2075, another, you know, 50 years?
Mr. Chairman, it's about a 10-year process for a lease. And so again, when you're looking at, you know, 16, 19 years, that window's closing unless we have some significant, you know, leasing reform at the federal level to where we can, you know, accelerate and streamline a little bit. But our window's closing. But your question is, you know, if a change in administration may be a get-out-of-jail-free card for the time being, but there's got to be some significant reform at the federal level.
Well, and I think too, the last thing I'll say, and I don't want to get off our agenda again, but, you know, you look at these newer coal plants, you know, the newest ones we built, one in, you know, in Texas and Campbell County. Cleanest plants in the world. I mean, it's incredible. And we should be burning more coal, particularly for like electrical generation and using these other fuels for whatever, transportation, medicine, fertilizers. But yeah, it's just an incredible, so I hope, I'm still hopeful we come out of this goofiness. And, but I appreciate your work, and we'll keep working, all of us working together, and appreciate you helping educate us and as we move forward.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could, the whole direction that we're going is so counterproductive. And, you know, when you look at the big existential threat that we've been led to believe is carbon dioxide. And so the solution that we're going down the path on is carbon capture. Well, if you're not burning coal in the United States, carbon capture is never going to happen because the Chinese aren't going to do it. The Indians aren't going to do it. They're building coal plants, you know, one every couple of weeks. And they don't give a damn about carbon capture. So the only way it's going to happen is if we develop it here with our existing coal fleet and get it to a point where it's commercially viable and then export it to other countries. It's not going to happen if we shut down our coal plants. It's not going to happen if we stop mining our coal.
Well, those countries aren't burning low sulfur coal either.
They're not.
And so I just think it's so important the rest of the country realize what a beautiful treasure we have here in this Powder River Basin coal. And you know, in the end, and this will be my last, I promise, committee, but in the end, it hurts poor people. I mean, that's, in the end, it hurts poor people in poor countries. And when we raise the basic costs of energy and everything that's so dependent on it, but our whole standard of living.
Mr. Chairman, it hurts poor people. It's going to hurt non-poor people too when they lose their jobs.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, we say all this stuff and you increase the cost, it's not going to work. So appreciate your work. That's where this started, and continue to keep up the good work and let us know how we can help. So, okay.
Tax relief, Mr. Chairman.
I heard that part too, yeah. Okay, who's next?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mueller, Petroleum Association of Wyoming. Thanks so much for the time. Thank you, committee, for your hard work on all these issues. Appreciate my friend, Mr. Detai, setting it up pretty well, and to try to not be the third monkey. I enjoyed the presentation from Mr. Gill about tangible personal property, and just sort of bringing it back to the topic at hand and why I think tangible personal property is a way for you to start to attack all the things that Mr. Detai was talking about. The more time I spend with it, the more I think that it is ripe for reform, perhaps drastic reform, but at a minimum, some reform around the margins. Because quite frankly, I don't understand the philosophical reasons behind the tax, number one. And number two, I don't understand why it plays out the way it does. for industry in Wyoming. And keep in mind that, of course, it is the mineral industry that pays the lion's share of tangible personal property tax. So Mr. Gill brought up, of course, our 2024 State Business Tax Climate Index. Love all that. First on individual income tax rank, first on corporate tax rank. But Mr. Chairman and members, it's so important for me to repeat this. I know you've heard me say it before. I bang my spoon in my high chair about this all the time, that is number one for every corporate sector in Wyoming except for minerals. Right? We don't have, it's number one because we don't have a corporate income tax, except for that we do on one industry. We just call it the severance tax, right? And the philosophy behind that is, of course, we're severing minerals, and so we pay for that right. I understand that. But in tax parlance, we're paying 6% of the value of our product. That's a corporate income tax, and only one industry pays it. 6.5 for Mr. Detail. I don't want to pick at that scab.
Used to be like 13 back in the day.
Yeah,
It's been
6
coming
for us,
down.
6.5 for my friend. So you start to look at the landscape of what's possible to get at, and I keep coming back to this tangible personal property and the efforts by the legislature, apart from Senator McEwen's effort to get rid of it entirely, have all been sort of on the margins of de minimis. So of course, again, the lion's share is paid by the industry, and de minimis doesn't help the industry. It helps, the minerals industry. It helps the small end of small businesses, and that's great. I don't have any problem with that. But it doesn't get at what we're getting at. And so then you start to think about, how does this play out in fact, day to day for operators in Wyoming? Okay, so again, Wyoming doesn't really have big oil. There are about 300 small companies in Wyoming that collectively produce about a third of the product in Wyoming. These are the companies that have the kind of older equipment, the trended equipment that my friend Mr. Ralston is going to talk about. So it's so important for the committee to understand. Mr. Gill gave a great presentation and kind of brushed over this idea of trending. This just happens. This is just like a thing, like trending. It's like having lunch. This trending is a big deal, and it hurts our industry. And so Mr. Ralston is going to get to that. And I want the committee to understand that part of it. But you have all these small companies and even the larger ones with all of this equipment classified as industrial, and paying, for the most part, paying severance and also paying ad valorem on the property itself at 100% of the value. And then you have the equipment at the industrial rate, 11.5%. So, I really appreciated that chart about all the data in the various counties. So, it's hard for me to wrap my mind around why a giant warehouse full of computer equipment is assessed at 9.5%, but our equipment is 11.5%. I just don't understand that philosophically. And the way it plays out day to day is this added tax on equipment we've already paid for, and paid for more than once from a tax perspective. 3 times, in fact, generally, that this one is on here too. So there's, to me, it seems like there's a lot, that this is just ripe for you all to do some reforms. It could be major, could be minor. I'm kind of open to it all. I think Ms. Harstruth is going to talk a little bit more about possible options. And then I just want to close my comments, and I'll take questions, Mr. Chairman, on the BELS system. I loved that Mr. Gill put up the manual and showed the manual about how, and scrolled down. I hope you all looked at that. Did you see that graph with all the little things and the highlighted, and this arrow is worth this and this? Why are we doing that? Why, really? Every year we look at that little thing and there's all these lines and this thing and that line and this little bolt and nut. That is a cost. That is a cost to us. That is a cost to the state and to the assessors to go through that year after year after year. Now, I am not wedded to the BELS system, and Lord knows I don't think Colorado does much right. So I'm not suggesting that we just adopt Colorado BELS wholesale. We need to think about it if we're going to do that. But part of the point of BELS is that we get away from that business, and we have a little bit more of a list, a basic equipment list, and everybody knows what it's valued at, and maybe there's some tweaks here and there. I don't know. I'm not totally wedded to it. I don't know that it's the panacea that'll fix everything. But in terms of oil and gas, in terms of the work involved with it, I just don't think it should be dismissed out of hand. And if we think that the Wyoming Property Manual is the answer, I would suggest that that's not the case. So I'll end there, Mr. Chairman, and I think committed to you and the co-chairman that if you wanted to pursue bills, again, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not pushing that as like this is going to save everybody's life. But if you want to pursue it more, I would help the committee find people in taxpayers and regulators in Colorado to come talk a little bit more about in depth about how it works. If you want to, I'm happy to do that. Mr. Chairman, I'd take questions. Thank you.
Okay. Senator McEwen, and then Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I promise I won't bring up the grinder, okay? But this is a horrible tax. We put $700 million on top of the reserves we already had. $700 million. To get rid of personal property tax was going to cost $290 million. We put, in the last 3 years, enough money away to provide 12 years worth of personal property tax relief. And we're out there investing it, and we're growing more government because we like government. At the end of the day, this needs to go away. It's a terrible tax. Maybe we look at some kind of reform to replace it, but the truth of the matter is you can't have any tax relief without cutting spending. It doesn't matter where you go, spending has to be cut if we're going to give tax relief. And I'll argue with anybody about that later if they want to. But the truth of the matter is, my belief, Wyoming does not have a revenue problem. We have spending issues. And next session, I promise you, I'll be back with my silly little bill, and everybody will be worried about it. But I'm going to keep pushing it until I get it done, if I can get it done. It's a terrible tax. If you own a piece of equipment dated to 1932, your trending analysis on that is 35 times the cost. None of it makes any sense. So if we're not going to cut spending, we definitely need to reform how we're collecting taxes. And I live in the Powder River Basin. My neighbors are miners. They work hard. And I'm going to agree with Mr. Detail. You cut the taxes, their wages will go up. And if their wages go up, everybody wins. And the truth of the matter is, at the risk of sounding arrogant, how goes Campbell County in the Powder River Basin is how the state goes. Period. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, would you agree with me?
Thanks for that question. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, all I want to say is that I am interested in getting some type of reform to tangible personal property, particularly for those 300 to 400 small companies that I referenced before. Whether or not massive reform or complete elimination is possible, I don't know. That's a difference between the bodies, but I'm interested in finding some win. There's a lot of options for that, and we'll get to those.
How big are their accounts, you think, the small operators, those small accounts you just referenced? I mean, I'm just trying to think of exemptions, you heard these other states, $50,000, $100,000 exemptions to cover. How many small guys does that take, wipe them right out of the whole mix?
Yeah,
Mr.
Mr. Chairman,
those numbers, right?
Yeah, I mean, Department of Revenue would have those. I don't think they probably don't have them with them here today, but we can certainly break that out.
Figure it out, see what that looks like. Okay, Representative Barrett had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Mr. Obermueller. And Mr. Detail did an excellent job of giving us kind of the status of the industry and what pressures they're under, and we can appreciate that. But your industry's under pressures now too with this, this new bonding issue. Maybe you could just share with us, how that's impacting these small operators. It might even address the good chairman's question to some extent as well, just so that we understand the importance of providing some sort of relief here.
Go ahead, Mr. Obermiller.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Bear. I appreciate it. A lot of the federal rules that have come down over the past 3 years have been, they're a little bit esoteric. They have to do with leasing. They're a little bit of a slow burn on oil and gas. This most recent one, as part of the fluid mineral leasing, has one section of which is the one that increases royalties and rentals and all that. As one part of that, it has an increase of the minimum bond for oil and gas operators. It is probably the biggest threat to Wyoming small operators that I've seen in my time, for sure, and perhaps ever, I don't know. But essentially, the BLM has always had the authority to set a bond, and the bond, of course, is to make sure that at the end of a oil well's life, that the company that drilled the well is responsible for cleaning it up. That's what the bond is for. Fair is fair. No problem with that. That bond rate has been set, and you've heard it. It's been set for 60 years. But what sort of forget about the second part is the BLM has always had the authority to increase that bond. They do that by inspection and by evaluating risk, and then they can up that bond amount if they feel like the risk is different. So what's happened now at the Biden administration, and the rule sort of codified it, is that they have done sort of three things. Number one, DC has taken over the inspection regime. So it used to be that BLM Wyoming tried to do about 700 inspections a year. DC is mandating something more like 2,500. Then the inspections are what trigger a bond review, and the minimum bond by that rule is increasing by 1,400%. But again, that's just the minimum bond. So then they go out on these inspections and do whatever risk assessment they do, read the entrails and all that, and those bonds can be upwards, can climb even higher. So for example, operator in Fremont County just had their bond increased from $300,000 to $4.1 million. They can't do that. They don't have that kind of money. And what you hear from the opposing side is, what are you all worried about? You just go, you're never paying $4.1 million. You're getting a surety bond, and you're paying a fraction of that. Of course, that's how it works for large companies that have access to the surety market. Wyoming small operators do not have access to surety market. So I know, Representative Bear, you've heard from folks up in your neck of the woods who in the previous bond, they've put their cash savings to be the bond. There's no other source for them to meet this. So we're attacking it in three ways. We've filed litigation in federal court. Of course, our delegation in DC knows about it. And then we're also working with the Joint Minerals Committee on a sort of a novel approach that the state of Wyoming might help small companies get access to the surety market. But that's in a nutshell is what it is. And that third one about Wyoming helping, and it brings it back to this, is that Wyoming is in a position to help these people, and TPP might be a way to do it.
Just a follow-up question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My impression is that, as you stated, many of these small businesses, upwards of 300 of them in the state of Wyoming, could be out of business based on this. So is it your thought that these wells would then be picked up by large operators that could afford the bonding, or are they going to go out of business and these wells are going to become orphan wells? And if they become orphan wells, exactly how much revenue would the state get then?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Bear, no, the larger companies that are drilling 3-mile horizontal wells in the Powder River Basin are not interested in legacy assets. So the major irony of the bonding rule is it's intended to try to make sure that there are less orphan wells. It's going to create more orphan wells. And from a revenue side, a third of our revenue is from these guys, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just for clarification, because it's my understanding that it's closer to 450, 470 small businesses. And it's my understanding that roughly those businesses actually, so those are small businesses, those are families that live in your neighborhood. For everybody in this room and for this panel, these are the families who live in your neighborhood. They make their money here, they spend their money here, okay? And every one of those businesses, and I probably have these numbers wrong, so I'll ask you to clarify, and every one of those businesses feed another 2 or 3, in some cases more, other small businesses. So you double, triple that number easily. And so those are the families in your neighborhoods that we are potentially impacting with this. And I guess I'm asking you the question, is that if you could explain that better, maybe make some clarity to that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Block, you did it just fine. Of course, the indirect and intangible employment and GDP and all of that related to oil and gas is pretty well known and pretty enormous. Just the direct GDP in Wyoming is over $8 billion, just direct to oil and gas, not the indirect and intangible that you're talking about.
Questions, Mr. Obermiller? Okay, who's next on your panel? Who's up? Oh, I'm sorry, Senator McKeon.
I just want to verify, as I looked at numbers before we came down here, those bonds for the stripper wells and the little guy are going to go from $10,000 for the bond to $500,000? They don't even make that kind of money. Do I have a good handle on that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it's 10,000 to 150,000 on a per lease basis, and then slipping my mind on what it is currently, up to 500,000 on a statewide basis. So the 1,400% increase is the 10 to 150 on a per lease basis. But again, that's just the minimum. The rule is pretty clear that what they're trying to do, what the BLM is trying to do is they're trying to bond at full reclamation value of every single well in Wyoming. And they've changed their definition from that used to be considered idle after 7 years of non-production. They've moved that down to 4. So all of a sudden there's a balloon of what's considered idle, and then full reclamation value of all of those would take, Wyoming BLM already holds $85 million in bonding authority for reclamation for oil and gas. This would take it up to $1.9 billion. At a minimum, it just removes that money from Wyoming's economy, at a minimum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate your answers to this. The bonds are actually, and I'm just making sure I understand this, the state bond, if it's on state land, goes up to 150,000. If it's federal, that can go up to 500,000.
Go ahead, Mr.
The
Obermiller.
cost that I heard to actually plug the wells, and it's an average. It's an average. Some are deep, some are not so deep.
Right.
But you can fix one of those wells and plug it for about $75,000, $80,000. And we're going to require them to have a $150,000 bond. And I just want to make sure I understand this. Am I close?
Mr. Chairman, Senator McKeon, yeah, except for I'm only referring to the federal wells, not state land wells. So it's those in that leasing rule where the bond has gone up by that amount. That's correct.
Okay. Co-Chair Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to TPP and the issue of trending, were you going to talk about that, or was that going to be Bobby? Okay, thank you.
Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Ashley Harpstreet. I'm the Executive Director for Wyoming Taxpayers Association. As you have heard from my colleagues' testimony, we are not asking for the elimination of tangible personal property, but we do have some suggested changes to consider that we know would be easier to administer in a consistent manner and would provide relief / reform to some of the largest taxpayers in the state while protecting this revenue source our tax structure is currently reliant on. If you look at the statute of 39-13-103 BII, suggested changes that we previously discussed with the Senate during the 2024 session is using a phrase, using generally accepted appraisal standards for personal property General fair market value shall be determined using indexes and depreciation schedules promulgated by the department. However, and this is the key, under no circumstances shall the index ceiling be higher than the depreciation floor. So however you would want to wordsmith that, we just want to make sure those stay in step. Or a very simple fix would be stop trending when it reaches 20% of acquisition value, and/or lower the 11.5% industrial property tax rate. Thank you for your consideration. I did bring along a board member and a subject matter expert, Mr. Bobby Ralston, to further elaborate on why this would be so important.
Quickly, though, for Ms. Harpstra, go ahead, Representative Zwanitzer.
Just check, Mr. Chairman, can you send that to us, Ashley, on a page with maybe some information on exactly why as we move forward?
Sure, not a
Okay,
problem.
Mary. Okay, Mr. Ralston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Bobby Ralston, helping out Ashley today with WTA. Just to talk a little bit about the trending and depreciation. Typically, depreciation ends at some point in time. Trending never does. And Senator McEwen, your example of your meat grinder is a perfect one, because he could probably buy a brand new meat grinder for less than what he's being valued at, but he probably has some emotional attachment to that particular meat grinder. I don't know. But as an example, let me give you the example of a wellhead. A wellhead is nothing but steel, okay? It doesn't wear out. We paint them every once in a while, but that doesn't increase the value. And they last a long time. And so let's say I spend $40,000 on a wellhead, it's out there for 20 years. I'd still probably buy that wellhead for $40,000. Just because you have inflation somewhere doesn't mean that every piece of equipment is affected by that inflation. And so we've talked a little bit about the little guys, and it appears that where this trending really hurts is on small operators that tend to use older equipment, don't replace their stuff as often as a large operator would, and small businesses family-owned businesses who've been in business for years. So there are some things we can do, and my recommendation would be that once we stop depreciating a piece of equipment, that we just stop trending it. It's going to be worth more because during the times that you're depreciating, it's still ratcheting itself up. But that would be my recommendation. I'll stand for any questions.
Appreciate you all being here today. Thank you for your testimony. Keep up the good work. Thank you. Okay, any other public comment on personal property? Good morning.
Is it morning?
Is it still morning? No, good afternoon. It's 12:04.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. Certainly interested in the dialogue and what these things might look like. My only intention in getting up here was just to provide some additional information as we continue to consider this topic. And first off, I'll share that I will send this information to you because I do have a couple of data sheets on this. But I think it's important to understand how important tangible personal property can be to local governments in terms of the overall property tax equation. And in doing that, I'll just point out that there are currently, or at least from fiscal year 22, and I do have fiscal year 23 data, but what I had available to me is 22. And in fiscal year 22, there were 5 counties where tangible personal property made up more than 30% of all property taxes across all of the various categories, whether that's residential, commercial, or industrial. And just to highlight that, those counties are Campbell in fiscal year '22 was 39.76%, Carbon was 51.42%, Converse 51.03%. I mentioned 5 over 30. This one's just barely under 30, but Lincoln County was 29.11%. And the big one, Sweetwater County, 67.25% of all of their property assessed was tangible personal property. So this is a big deal when it comes to local government revenue, and in particular for those counties that I mentioned. One that I did not mention, but I think is important, you heard reference to our data centers. And I know we're going to talk about sales and use tax tomorrow, but our data centers, we provide them a sales and use tax exemption, a data center exemption. And really the only property that we assess for those data centers is their tangible personal property. So if you eliminated that particular line for Laramie County, you're talking $5-6 million just on the data centers that are there, and there are more coming, as we know and as we've seen in the headline. So just wanted to provide that to you. The only other thing that I wanted to reference is you did see that Idaho made some pretty significant changes to their property tax system here recently. So I had contacted my counterpart and said, so what did you do? And his response was that the way that they were able to accomplish that was to have the state buy down those property taxes. So in essence, the increase in sales and use tax is being captured by the state and put into a dedicated fund that they're then sending to the locals for them to buy down their property taxes. It's quite a bit different than what you're proposing, Mr. Chairman, but it is along that line of trying to find a mechanism to ultimately do that. So it wasn't just we eliminated those things. There was a trade-off that they made, and that was to distribute the increase in sales and use tax to local governments. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd certainly stand for any questions and appreciate your time today.
Questions, committee? Mr. Riemann. Yeah, it sounded vaguely familiar, buying down tax exemptions with sales tax. Okay. Any other questions? Representative Ide, Senator Ide, I should say.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeremiah, thanks for being here. You know, it was brought up with Mr. Obermuller and yourself, and maybe I missed something here on buying down the taxes, but can you explain why a data center is getting, you know, the 9.5% treatment, and then oil and gas in industrial is getting the 11.5%? Maybe Mr. Obermuller can answer that, or maybe you can, Mr.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, other than to say that they're classified different, that oil and gas operators are classified under that industrial classification versus commercial, which is the data center falling under that all other classification, I couldn't tell you who made the decision to put them in those buckets, but that's why you see that difference.
Very good. Any other questions? Okay, thank you for being here. Okay, any other testimony on personal property? Okay, seeing none, we are going to break for lunch, going to stay on our schedule, so we'll resume the meeting at 1:15. Okay, thank you all.